Getting right into it. This podcast was thought of as a way to innovate the way stories are presented in podcasts instead of the typical tape recorder or video format. The way that this story is conveyed is mostly over camp announcements, with a very talkative announcer, but a tape recorder is still very present in the show, but the purpose of it does differ than how it's normally utilized. The two main characters, Sydney and Jedediah, are jam-packed with relationship problems, and those issues are the driving force of the show for the most part. The show is inspired by the Magnus Archives and the want to do better. I've only listened to the first dozen episodes of the Magnus Archives, so I have no personal opinion on this. And welcome to Nightingale and Wolf 395. Now to the thing that actually made me listen to the show. Will Wood made the music for it. Along with the music in the show, we also wrote 4 lyrical songs with 4 characters in the show. These songs are Venetian Blind Man, To Urge to Be Human So Don't Be One, Your Body My Temple, and When Somebody Needs You. And I'm gonna talk about them for a second. Not the songs itself, but the reception. Because with these songs, some people just saw that Will Wood made something new and didn't realize that it was connected to a podcast. And if you go into the comments section of these comes clear. And I want to make it very clear that I don't say this with any kind of hostility or annoyance, because that's how I found out about this show too. I was looking up Venetian Blind Man and saw that I was connected to a character from a show or a podcast. And I googled, did Will Wood make a podcast? And I found out he composed for this show. And so when I read the comments for some of these songs, specifically Your Body My Temple and To Urge to Be Human, and see them talking about how homoerotic it is, how it sounds like a gay villain song, and all these other things, I just want to go, yeah, you're right. Yes. Take my hand, let me show you these characters. So yeah. Will Wood, he made all the background music and made full songs to some of the characters. Mayfield, at least, was a big fan of his, and used a lot of his music as direct inspiration for the characters and story. And as someone who also listens to Will Wood, surprisingly, I can feel that influence very well. It captures the vibe well, in my opinion. Will Wood apparently really liked the show's pitch and agreed to work on the music. In a live stream, Beloved said that Will Wood used to exist in camp here and there, but does not anymore, and I just wanted to say that because I think that's funny. So that's cool and everything, but what's the show about? It's about Sydney October Sargent, camp nurse and chipper announcer. I really like him. I really like Sydney. There's the co-nurse, Jedediah, who has various secrets he's adamant on keeping hidden, and has a close relationship with Sydney, but the relationship is very strained currently. Ooh. The world of camp here and there is absurd. There's fantastical creatures, changing sky colors, and routine natural disasters. But this summer, a man in a pink elephant mask starts making himself known around the camp, and seems to be focused on Sydney. Whoa, what's happening? What's gonna happen? Whoa. All the characters in this show are thoroughly fleshed out and interesting. The writing can be poetic and chilling and funny and sweet when it needs to be. The writing for the dialogue is never unnatural and it feels very genuine. Just very well written overall. Fun setting and the mystery is engaging, it's very engaging. I check the runtime, you can see how engaging I find this story. Okay, so this video is going to be divided into sections. The first actual one is a plot summary, but I want to make it known that I don't want this to be watched instead of the actual show, and just the way I want to convey what I want to talk about, I couldn't imagine a way I couldn't do it without merging it with a plot summary, and I know they suck. I know plot summaries are annoying in video essays, but I also just really want to point out fun things in each episode and talk about that. And it wouldn't make sense if I didn't establish what I was talking about. This section is for me. I'm doing that for me. And I want to have someone sit next to me while watching this show so I can pause every few minutes and ramble. It's fun for me. If I do that with someone in real life, you know what I'm saying. As I go to the show, I will be referring to things as they happened, and will try not to jump around, but I still might bring up things that are yet to come from time to time. And just to be safe, I want to put some content warnings about the show, and this might be seen as spoilers, so maybe skip like a couple seconds ahead. So some of the vague content warnings: child abuse, starvation, death, conversations about death, routinely, manipulation, relationship issues, powerlessness, and just, it's better if you just go to, like, each episode has like a script on their official website with content warnings for each and every episode. So if this is something that you're concerned about, then it'd be better to look up each episode script and see specifically what the content warnings are. Okay, to the fun part. How many pages are there? 123 right now. Okay, cool. Okay, let's move on to Camp Here and There, Episode 1. Episode 1. Okay, the first few things we learned. 1. Sydney does the announcements, and I love Sydney so much. I love Sydney. 8:63 is the current time. The sky is vaulted, and skies typically don't do that. And I really like the description of a vaulted sky because that's horrifying, and I like the visual. And the fumes of the bonfire tell Sydney things, and he's an oracle. I think Sydney is immediately set up so damn well. He comes off as really chipper, and that as he overshares some personal aspects of himself during his introduction. Personal things such as he was unwanted by his peers and guardians alike, slowly dying of secret diseases and fundamentally heartbroken. And he says, just like you. He's also a nurse. Then Sydney talks about someone named Jedediah. He is Sydney's assistant nurse. Sydney describes him as handsome, so there seems to be a close relationship there. We get some Jedediah lore. He's good, and apparently likes to listen when Sydney rambles, and Sydney enjoys talking to the kids. Quickly after, we're introduced to Lucille through Sydney. She is the camp director who isn't typically seen around the camp. The kids sign waivers, and the bonfire can lure you in. Let it be known that the food being announced and half of the point of the announcements existing is something that I will barely bring up. This is my vain attempt to make you listen to the podcast. They're good, and the chef's name is Matthew. I won't mention him a lot, but I enjoy Matthew. I like Matthew. Then Sydney starts talking about a very important character. The Pink Elephant Man. Woo! A man in a pink elephant mask. Written in Sydney's notes for the announcements, there's a report on the man.
A strange fellow began skulking the parameters of the campsite in between last summer and this one. He's been described as not too short and not too old, but definitely extremely zealous. He hasn't hurt anyone yet or set foot on the campgrounds, but the sight of him has been said to incite secondhand feelings of fervor, a directionless sense of almost religious alacrity, an impulse without an object.
Okay, lunchtime. Sydney was cursed to eat nothing but buttered bread, and that will stay there for the rest of the show. Sydney cannot eat any, food. As he's talking about the curse in a negative way over the announcements, he quickly tries to blow it off as just the way it is. I think this shows that while Sydney does absolutely overshare, he does try to catch himself on certain things as to not scare the kids unnecessarily or make them worry about him. Jedediah believes that the statement left in the notes was a prank, and Sydney immediately believes that a counselor named Joshua did it. We are given no reason why. Sydney just fucking hates him for currently unknown reasons. And that's a running gag throughout the first few episodes of the podcast, that Sydney fucking hates Joshua. Dinner time. Dinner. Some of the counselors also think Sydney shares too much over the announcements, but something specifically more important is revealed. Marisol did encounter the Elephant Man, but did not tell anyone about it, and given that the only other person who would know about this encounter is the Pink Elephant Man, It feels like it's safe to assume that he somehow broke into the building and wrote this encounter on Sydney's notes himself. To me, this is a very subtle way and a well-executed setup to the horror of the Pink Elephant Man. He broke into a secure building with completely no evidence left behind, just to write down an encounter he had with a random counselor. So, and according to him, I've seen that he wrote the note. He was around camp last summer, but apparently no one noticed him until now, and his existence is only now known because he wants it to be. He now wants to be known to the entire camp, because I'm sure he knows that Sydney would absolutely read what's in his notes to the camp. This also sets up Sydney's relationship with the Elephant Man, because if you consider this their first interaction, then the first thing he does to Sydney is use/manipulate him as an avenue to get what he wants. One other interesting thing that's written is he hasn't hurt anyone yet or set foot inside the campgrounds. This is an implicit threat, obviously. He also describes what his powers did to Marisol. So if it already wasn't made clear, he knows exactly what he's doing to people, and he seems to relish in it.
A directionless sense of almost religious alacrity. An impulse without an object. Marisol Yuchengo, counselor of Cabin Grasshopper, even reported a blurring at the edges of her vision, as if the sheer verve, rattling around in her heart with nowhere to escape, was fit to blind her.
It's just really, he's amping himself up. Like, he's like relishing and describing what he can do to people. Also maybe foreshadowing with the description a directionless sense of almost religious alacrity. I don't know. I guess you'll find out later. Maybe it's foreshadowing. Again, I think this letter is scary and such, but I also think that it's very funny in retrospect. Again, I'm trying to keep this thing in chronological order, so I'll try not to spoil anything. You'll probably hear me mention this again later when I can, when it makes sense for me to talk about it. But like just, but like for now, I still want to talk about it a little bit, but I think it's a little funny. He has been described as not too short and not too old. Man, come on. It sounds like he's just flattering himself. Like, what was the need in writing that down? Like, it's not a physical description so people know what to look out for. It's just, he's not too short and he's not too old. He's not describing himself, he's just like, it's a compliment, I guess. I don't know how to describe it. Throughout this whole description, he describes himself as he's so high and mighty, and I just find that kind of self-indulgence is kind of funny. During my rewatches, I always forget that in the early episodes, he's just fucking weird. Moving on. He brings up that Lucille maybe wouldn't like him talking about this, but she loves him too much to punish him. So they have some kind of close relationship. And currently, through Sydney's perspective, Lucille is a positive figure in his life, and he thinks that him sharing what may seem as a heavy subject matter is him protecting the kids by keeping them in the loop. And Jedediah is not treating the Elephant Man seriously and currently does not believe that he is real. When he talks about why the Elephant Man may or may not be dangerous, he describes his powers as a little overbearing when it comes to sharing about his feelings. And considering that the vast amount of story is being told through Sydney sharing what some counselors may consider too much over the announcements, I don't know. I feel like there's something there, but I don't know how to verbalize it. It seems like a fun connection. I don't know how though, but yeah. The recorder segment. And now we're brought into the final established section of most episodes. In most episodes, after the dinner time announcements, we hear Sydney talking to a tape recorder. It's supposed to function as an injury report to give to Lucille, but it never really functions as that for reasons that will be revealed later. Instead, it's used as a diary for Sydney. In this episode, the reason Sydney doesn't try and give an injury report is because no kid got hurt today. He reveals that the Elephant Man broke into the building again, specifically the room he's currently in and locked behind a couple minutes ago. And the room has 3 locked doors, and I'm very interested in the layout of this building, and he somehow got through those doors when Sydney was in the room. And we know that his power involves making people feel some kind of fervor, but it works differently with Sydney. Instead of pumping him full of adrenaline, it does the complete opposite and drains all the energy out of him. Earlier when I said that the note he reads is an early example of the Elephant Man manipulating Sydney, this power he has specifically over him can be interpreted as a metaphor for that. Him just being around Sydney takes away any other urges, and in Sydney's own words,
"It's not that the sight of him made me feel calm, not quite. It made me feel complacent."
He leaves Sydney unguarded, open to influence.
"I feel violated. And I believe that if he tried to hurt me, I would not have attempted to stop him."
We also get some information about how his powers function. When the Elephant Man was in the room with Sydney, he went to slightly lift up his mask. Sydney describes the feeling the Elephant Man pushed upon him increasing. So his power's potency is determined by how much skin he's showing. Anyways, the Pink Elephant Man starts eating Sydney's worms. Sydney has worms. Sydney has these pet worms, which he loves, and the Elephant Man just starts eating them by the handful. And he seems to enjoy it. He's described as savoring it. Maybe he just really enjoys the taste. But the fact that he went out of his way to break into where Sydney was and eat his worms, and not just some random forest worms, seems to imply a specific motive. This being just a random act to scare Sydney for no real reason also wouldn't really make much sense. Because again, he was around last year and remained unnoticed until they wanted to. He seems to have some kind of plan or purpose on why he does things. So did he eat the worms to send a message? To show what kind of power he has over Sydney? To show that when he's around, that no matter what he does, he won't do anything to stop him? Did he want to feel or did he just want to feel some kind of power over Sydney? Or maybe the interpretation that I prefer, he was testing out to see exactly what his powers do to Sydney. Because again, his powers only have this effect on Sydney, so that's what we know right now, that only Sydney reacts this way. He is shown to know what his power does to the layman, but maybe he's not completely sure on how much it affects Sydney, so he's testing to see how much he can get away with. After the Elephant Man leaves, a camper comes to the door. She doesn't seem to have seen him, so we just continue to be unaware of how he gets in and out of that building. And this is gonna be the only time like I fucking nitpick this show a tiny bit. I could just be stupid. I could just be really fucking stupid and reading the script wrong. But the phrasing in this section confuses me a little bit. Sydney says he doesn't know how the Elephant Man got into the room, and that he's behind 3 locked doors, which I thought meant that the Elephant Man definitely did not come through the door. But later, Sydney says he walks back out. I don't know where he would have walked back out of if it wasn't through the doors. So he opened the doors? It could just be me who's confused. That's fine. Again, I could just be reading it weird. So to open the door, so I'm assuming the door got opened at some point. Again, walking back out. Where else would you walking back out of? You can't do that with a window. You can't do that with a vent. You would have described him leaving as walking back out. And the Sydney describing him leaving or walking back out means he saw him leave somewhere, but he doesn't know how he got in the first place. Maybe Sydney was turned around for the first half. I don't know. But again, like, walking back out implies that he walked back out, and Sydney being confused that the kid did not see him seems also imply that he walked out of the door, because why else would Sydney assume that the kid might have seen it if it was through a vent or out a window? And so I'm assuming he walked back out of the door. It's such a fucking massive nitpick, but in my first draft of this thing, I had a theory that connected to that he went out of the vents. Not a theory, just like a 10-minute segment about me talking about it. But like, I assumed that he came in and out through a vent, and then I got caught up on like what was being said. Anyways, I'm sorry. Again, assuming that he opened the door. So to open the door, he maybe had keys. If he did, where would he have gotten them? Then enters Jedediah. He's been working on a project, and whatever it is, it doesn't seem to be going great. Sydney tells him that he just saw the Elephant Man, And after Sydney says that he didn't hurt him, Jedediah suggests that it was an hallucination, and Sydney says that he hasn't had hallucinations in years. We also get the first instance of Jedediah kind of blowing off the Elephant Man because Sydney wasn't physically hurt. Jedediah has been tired and spacey lately and doesn't really talk to Sydney anymore. And they knew each other as children. Okay, episode 2. Yay, episode 2. The camp is invaded by penguins. They were living in a secret ancient tunnel system underground that were under the camp. But before that, used to Rowan. We're introduced to Rowan through Sydney. Rowan is a counselor of Captain Magpie Ma and has premonitions about the weather. Because the weather of the world can commonly consist of deadly disasters, he's typically very anxious about the sky. This sets up a preconceived notion on what the audience thinks of Rowan and how he might act. And I will talk about that more as we get into later episodes, but he's properly introduced as a character. Then during the announcements, Sydney finds the penguins in the vents and goes running for Lucille. Lunchtime. Penguins break into the room where Sydney is doing the announcements and kidnaps him. Dinner time announcements. Sydney's back. Sydney's okay. So apparently the penguins have been residing in an unknown ancient tunnel system that is under the camp, and it connects to the vents of the buildings. Anyways, apparently Sydney has been attempted to be used as a ritualistic sacrifice at least once before, but that doesn't happen this time. When he was kidnapped by the penguins and taken into the tunnels, the penguins were actually quite chill. They communicate to Sydney that in exchange for the camp's safety, they want a weekly supply of salmon. Sydney agreed to these conditions. Lucy was pissed off about this, but not at Sydney because she loves Sydney. So says Sydney. And Jedediah is still missing, but record a segment. Sydney says that he doesn't believe Lucille listens to the injury reports, and to prove that, he begins to slander her, like calling her a witch and just mean stuff, which can add to possible complexities to what he said previously over the announcements. That being that Lucille loves him so much she's willing to put down her flamethrower and just allow the penguins to extort them for salmon weekly. But apparently she doesn't love him enough to even listen to the injury reports. This seems to hint that Lucille doesn't truly care that much for Sydney. But why would Sydney even bring it up over the announcements? He could have just not brought up the possibility of him getting in trouble, and I doubt anyone would have noticed. I think it was an attempt to communicate to the audience that there was some conflicting emotions going on with Lucille and Sydney's relationship. Again, the show sets up characters incredibly well. In the earlier episode, it can be assumed that she just plays the role of the cold boss figure, but her just being a boss figure is challenged by how Sydney talks about her, with some kind of familiarity and fondness, which makes the audience engaged in the mystery of her as a character. The perception of her being viewed more fondly because she apparently has a decent enough relationship with Sydney that he can stop her going on a rampage. And because we like Sydney, she gets some brownie points. But just a couple of minutes later, she becomes suspicious again because, again, she doesn't care enough to listen to the recordings, and despite loving Sydney, and Sydney's aware of that, to prove that she doesn't listen to the recordings, he says,
"Check this out. I can slander her all I want. Lucille is an evil witch and she's plotting my doom."
The inclusion of him saying all I want can imply that he does have some negative feelings to say about her regularly enough. And I have to assume that he isn't just purely saying random negative things, and that they do have some meaning, plotting my doom. Not only do they apparently not have the best relationship, Sydney has some reason to believe that she has it out for him. Maybe not like that harshly, but like, you know what I mean. So, okay. Lucille is a negative force in his life, but again, he was able to convince her to not go on a rampage. And he said that she loved him over the announcements for seemingly no reason. So the audience is now increasingly more invested in who exactly Lucille is. If Sydney was able to convince Lucille, then it was probably because of something else, he said. Or she just generally had a different reason to suddenly drop it. Sydney considers giving these recordings to Jedediah because they don't really talk anymore, and Sydney said Jedediah used to like listening to his voice. Sydney goes on that he's mad at Jedediah because he because he abandoned him all while he was kidnapped and had to take care of the injured kids all by himself every day. And of course he's fucking worried about him. He just went missing during a penguin war. And then Jedediah walks into the room. Apparently he worked too late on his project. No one knows what this project is, and he spends nearly all of his time working on it, and he fell asleep in his office. He also does not care about the penguin war, but when Sydney says that he was kidnapped, he at least does seem genuinely worried about him. And then something the audience will need to remember happens. When Jedediah asks if he's alright, and Sydney says he's fine, and he says that he found it kind of fun and he wasn't physically hurt, and Jedediah responds,
"Okay. Good. Of course. You're always fine."
He also says, "I'm glad I don't have to worry about you as much as I used to." Even if Sydney really is fine, the first response seems particularly dismissive. It's worded like he feels silly for even being worried in the first place, hence the "of course." But the second quote implies that this change came somewhat frequently, because he apparently had to worry about him in the past. His project apparently involves engineering and is something that he picked up from school. And there's a snippet of a normal joking conversation about Sydney luring him into a corn maze. Episode 3. During the morning announcements, Sydney reveals that he has terrible nightmares, and that is something that becomes fairly plot relevant later on. Sydney sometimes has these little proverbs he gives out to the kids, and they tend to be kind of grim, but I think they're always delivered with a chipper tone, and I'm just mentioning it because I like it and I think it's a cool characterization thing. I think he's trying to be encouraging, but it always leads back to something kind of grim. Rowan's here. Rowan, yippee. Rowan's here, and he believes that there's going to be another weather crisis. Something so bad he immediately starts crying to Sydney. And Lucille does not care. Sydney tells a bad pun, chokes, and encourages the kids to stay inside despite Lucille not caring. Lunchtime! Sydney goes on about clocks, and how each tick is a reminder that everything will deteriorate and die. This may foreshadow a wider topic of the story, or just a specific item that I will mention when it comes up. Despite Lucille not caring, Sydney still goes on to take precautions to pray and make offerings to the silicone squirrels for protection against the weather. We then get a quick snippet of Jedediah and Sydney joking around with each other, because Sydney made a bad pun that doesn't make sense. The moments where we get a glimpse of the true dynamic, without all the angst, is very valuable to me. We haven't gotten a look at the more obvious issues between them yet, but there are issues. But the simple moments that give the audience something to mourn and look forward to while the angst is exhibited. These moments are normally spread apart, placed between painfully obvious relationship issues, and you learn that these moments of reprieve were more normal in the past, but something changed between them, so the audience feels sad that these moments are so infrequent now, and builds some mystery on what happened, because we want more of these moments, them to have fun with each other again, and that can't happen without trying to help treat the problem that caused it. And once things are okay between them, maybe they'll be able to just talk with each other normally more often. Dinner time. The thing Rowan was freaking out about was actually just soup Matthew was making for dinner, and Matthew apologized for causing trouble. I like Matthew. The kids make Sydney a wreath made of spears, and I like that little moment. I think it's nice to know that the kids do genuinely like Sydney, like they do care about him, despite not despite. They do care about him. They do like Sydney. The kids like Sydney. It's sweet. We get the start of shit going missing around the camp. Right now, specifically, Sydney is Sydney's personal objects, and he blames Joshua. Recorder. How much of his emotions Sydney keeps hidden over the announcements is very important for a lot of the show. Right now, it is shown that Sydney hides his more negative emotions from the kids. Sydney goes on to say that he's had a tough day trying to comfort Rowan and dealing with the possibility of an apocalypse. And surprise, Jedediah was unhelpful. Sydney excuses this by saying that Jedediah is just not good at comforting people. But all Sydney wanted him to do was acknowledge that the kids were scared. How much Sydney makes excuses for Jedediah not doing simple things illustrates a lot about their relationship and how he shoulders all the heavy lifting in it. Sydney even says,
"And I'm not just an infinite wellspring of emotional support, right?" I don't know. Jetty does a lot for me, and for the camp. I'm not trying to act ungrateful. These are all my own problems.
Sydney even defends Jedediah's actions to no one. Sydney is beginning to see the pink elephant man everywhere, and he doesn't want to tell Jedediah because he doesn't want to bother him. I assume this specific train of thought is a result of the previous time Sydney went to Jedediah about the pink elephant man. During the previous confrontation, Jedediah also brings up that Sydney might be hallucinating, and Sydney brings it up again now. In high school and college, he was on antipsychotics due to his hallucinations, and it apparently just stopped a couple years ago. But it's starting to worry him that he's having a break again. Even though Sydney immediately goes on to say that he knows he wasn't hallucinating for a various number of reasons, Sydney's momentary worry, despite his certainty of it not being hallucination, is another way to show that how Jedediah is unintentionally influencing Sydney. Also, Jedediah is described as apathetic and cynical, but Sydney immediately backtracks on that. Sydney got Jedediah to sleep early that night and is sleeping right beside Sydney. And Jedediah and Matthew made Sydney some sleepy time tea that used to help Jedediah for Sydney. It's supposed to help with nightmares. I mean, that's sweet at least. He also says that Lucio will protect him from the Elephant Man.
Episode 4. The tea worked and Sydney seems energized, semicolon parentheses. And the Gravediggers is coming to camp today.
The Gravediggers is a wondrous witch who tends to the death fields down south. Using her powers of reanimation, not the same thing as necromancy, by the way, the Gravediggers' magic can breathe a convincing imitation of life into your corpses.
This differentiation between reanimation and necromancy is something that is brought up a lot in this show. Sydney brings up reanimation won't be permanent, and for it to be, you have to go to the death fields. Jedediah interrupts and tells Sydney that he can't encourage the kids to go to the death fields. He reminds the kids that the fields are dangerous and unethical, but secretly tells them over the loudspeaker that he's going to be chaperoning them if they want to go.
And remember, when you die, you will rot. Love you!
Lunchtime. The Gravediggers came and put on a little carnival with the dead animals, and it sure was a hoot. As this was going on, Counselor Soren Baltimore, whoa, new character. Soren Baltimore of Cabin Ladybug went missing, whoa. And if he doesn't come back, Lucio will severely punish him. I also think it's notable that leaving the camp is phrased as running away, and not just, leaving. Salem and Marisol come into the announcement room and says they found Soren. Salem asks if the intercom is still on. She doesn't think that the kids should be hearing this and turns it off herself. In defiance, Sydney turns it back on, without either of the girls knowing. Soren is heading to the death fields, and then Sydney addresses the kids, which pisses off Salem. Sydney and Salem have this clear dichotomy between how they think they should treat the children. Salem thinks telling the kids everything that's going on would hurt and stress them out, and Sydney believes that the kids deserve to know what's going on around them. Salem's tone during the argument indicates that she already isn't the biggest fan of Sydney. Dinner! Apparently the death fields is something that is taught in schools.
Back then, there lived one dauntless magician who loved her land and her people so dearly that she sacrificed everything she had to bring it all back to life.
And everything in the death fields is dead, and they're forced to just imitate a twisted version of life. Lucille wasn't going to look for Soren, but once Sydney said that he was going to go, Lucille agreed to accompany him into the death fields, both in hazmat suits. Lucille does seem to go out of her way to look out for Sydney in certain situations. As I said a while ago, I don't believe that Lucille loves Sydney in the way that Sydney describes. And earlier, Sydney does say that he believes Lucille has it out for him for some reason, but again, he might have just been saying that
as an exaggeration or something just deflammatory to say about her. Either way, she is shown to be protecting Sydney in some sense currently. But once at the death fields, they find the Gravedigress, and she looks at Sydney and tries to beckon forwards towards the fields. And apparently the look of the Gravedigress's animalistic eyes and her corpsey appearance reminds Sydney of his mother. Mother mention, woo! They find Soren at the edge of the field, in the throes of temptation, drag him back to the camp. Recorder section. Sydney's plush rabbit went missing. He's bugging Jedediah for his company to try and get him in their bedroom and fall asleep at a reasonable time. Enter Jedediah. Sydney asks how his project is going, and he completely sidetracks this. Sydney talks about going into the death fields, and Jedediah is immediately worried. Instead of being worried about the dangers of the field, specifically because they're the death fields, he brings up the fact that Sydney left the camp at all, and seems very scared of this notion of him going outside of the campgrounds. But after he says that Lucille was with him the whole time, then Jedediah calms down. I really enjoy the contrast between the two times that Sydney describes the Gravedigress. Over the announcements, she's described poetically with like a menacing and dangerous aura, just as like a mythical figure. Overall, just talk about more seriously and with more like reverence. But with Jedediah, he starts excitedly talking about the same traits, describing what he found cool about the experience. Jedediah interrupts his, fun rambling about like his fun activities of the day and the digress. He interrupts and asks if Sydney's okay. He says that he is, and Jedediah asks Sydney not to leave the campgrounds without telling him. And then rambles a bit about how he doesn't want to control Sydney, but just wants to make sure he's safe. Sydney says that Jedediah would not have gone with him anyways. Then Jed just says he's going to bed. But like, this comment can barely be considered mean. Like, Sydney just says like, oh, you wouldn't have come with me anyways, even if I did find you and ask you. And it can barely be considered mean, like a little snappy at worst. This comment is giving Jedediah the first major part of the show. I'm gonna be mean to Jedediah, just so you know. This comment is giving more Jedediah more credit than he has been shown to deserve, because even if Sydney went to go get Jedediah, he's often in his office the whole day, and not even a war with penguins can reach him. And Jedediah doesn't even go to defend himself or give any response to Sydney. He just goes to separate himself from the situation. That is, he just goes to separate himself from the situation that's making him uncomfortable. When Sydney says something like kind of confrontational, kind of maybe a little mean, he just goes, I'm going to bed, to just leave the issue. Which like is a very good character thing. It's a very fun, like he's had this little interaction shows like a confrontation issue that he has. Like, again, even if we have no reason now, an issue is shown with him, and it's cool. It's a cool character thing. But when he says like, I'm going to bed, Sydney immediately apologizes. Sydney immediately apologizes for his comment, and Jedediah just responds with like a little stupid hum. No closure whatsoever, just Sydney says that he knows Jedediah cares, and they both say I love you to each other. Then Jedediah goes to bed. I don't know if this is like a good place to put this, but I think it's fair to understand why in my first watch through, even if I knew Jedediah wasn't the villain of it, because you can just kind of tell with that kind of thing. He wasn't going to be the main villain. He's, in my perspective, a dick. Obviously, yeah, again, if you've watched the podcast, you know what I mean. He comes off as the dickhead. In these first few episodes, we only context we have is Sydney being a fucking old person and Jedediah being weird the whole time. So like when I first was listening to this, I grew like a resentment towards Jedediah throughout like a lot of it, so I was like constantly like vigilant about him, so I just grew like a distrust of him. So if I come off as kind of like specifically mean towards Jedediah, again, this isn't saying he's not a fantastic character and that I don't really like him. It's just my first listen to, I was like, he made me anxious. He made me anxious, and that feeling kind of sticks with me even after a few listen throughs. It's like, it's still, bitch. This little hum again. This episode pisses me off. Anyways, episode 5, the opposite day episode. Yay, opposite day. Sydney and Jedediah are both on the mic together. I've already talked about why I like these moments of like normal / non-argumentative moments between them, and that is important to the story. And this episode has a fair amount of these moments, even though it's still kind of tense because Jedediah isn't really a fan of Opposite Day, while Sydney does seem to be a fan. Sydney's just teasing Jedediah and he's mildly annoyed. So Opposite Day is a government mandated holiday, and if they don't participate, then the government will have their heads. Sydney is making Jedediah do the announcements, and Jedediah is accusing Sydney of relishing in his suffering. And Sydney continues happily. He did it the opposite day. He hates it, Jedediah hates doing the opposite day thing. He hates it, he's having a bad time. Lunch. Jedediah comes back with a script so he doesn't get jumbled up. Again with opposite speak. A camper has become an authoritarian leader and attempts to execute Counselor Juniper, which he takes like a champ. Jedediah breaks character for a moment to ask the kids not to kill Juniper. Sydney jumps in and accuses him of squashing the kids' fun. Jedediah reminds him that people are getting hurt. But as long as the kids aren't the ones getting hurt, Sydney does not seem to care and teases Jedediah about doing a great job. They have a little back and forth about what the opposite of afternoon is. I think it's midnight.
This afternoon's activities are screaming until you pass out and breaking your legs with hammers. I would be happy to see you in my office anytime today. I love you. Hello.
Whoa, are you actually upset?
Sydney,
And he reads off the last of the announcement. Sydney finally picks up that Jedediah is actually upset, like and annoyed, and seems genuinely shocked that Jedediah is like pissed off. He seems to have just considered all of the previous conversation innocent teasing, even with Juniper currently being hanged by his neck. Dinner. Sydney's back on announcements, and despite it being illegal, Opposite Day has been cancelled by Lucille. Apparently, Opposite Day is a holy observation day. Sydney apologizes about his overexcitement about the whole holiday, and if he just let Jedediah stop the kids from hanging Juniper, he's fine. Juniper's fine. Then Opposite Day wouldn't have to have been cancelled. He was blinded by trying to make sure that the kids had fun. The things going missing around the camp is becoming more of a camp-wide issue. Recorder segment. Despite Sydney not really using the tape recorder for its intended purpose of cataloging injuries of the day, he feels like it's necessary for him to do it today. Before he gets to that, we get more Lucille and Sydney relationship information. He again reiterates that Lucille cares about him a lot, but question if it's his fault that Lucille doesn't seem to like being around him. Maybe something else is encouraging Lucille to care about Sydney. This line of thinking comes back later when talking about Jedediah. This might illustrate a similarity between the two of them. Earlier, he says that he's using the tapes to vent his emotions. and he seems very dismissive of his own emotions, referring to his venting as nonsense. He questions as to why he was even asked to do the injury reports if no one even listens to them in the first place. He questions if this is just busy work and is clearly very hurt by that prospect of just being given work to keep him busy. He feels the need to justify the fact that he's hurt by stating that anyone would be hurt. He also states that it would be unfair to treat him like something that needs to be distracted because he makes valuable contributions to the camp. He then moves on to the actual incident report, which includes about over 130 kids being injured that day. God, this camp has so many kids. I always forget how many fucking kids are at this camp. It's like too many. And when I say they were injured, it's like mostly in like whimsical and fucked up ways. I don't remember them off the top of my head. Cindy didn't even realize how bad the injuries actually were until this moment where he was talking about how many kids were hurt. And he questions if he's desensitized to children becoming hurt or like being hurt in general. Jedediah was actually helping and spending time with Cindy that day, you know, as his job as assistant nurse. Because that's his fucking job, in case you forgot. His job is to help Cindy in the nurse's cabin with the kids. Jedediah was actually helping and spending time with Cindy today. Cindy questions what he did differently to make Jedediah want to hang out with him. Yet another example to show how little Jedediah spends time with him, that when he does, it seems like an occasion that has to have been caused by something and not just Jedediah wanting to spend time with Cindy. Cindy says him wanting to spend more quality time with Jedediah is just him being greedy. Fucked up. That's a fucked up thing to think.
I know I was a little mean, but it's just so satisfying to wield psychological power over a man in a button-up.
Jabberbeaks are flying around, and if you listen, you can hear which day of the week you'll die.
I hear a different day every time, and boy, does that raise a lot of questions. Like, am I immortal? Am I already dead?
Because Captain Dumbbeetle attempted to hang and kill Juniper, Lucille has punished them to making them clean the mess hall for a week. Cindy tried to prevent this, but failed. He still believes the kids did nothing wrong when trying to kill Juniper. Cindy's notes for the announcements. Cindy's announcement notes were stolen, and he finally disqualifies Joshua off the suspect list because he's too stupid to pull this off.
And remember, the one thing you cannot, under any circumstances, allow a man to steal: your heart.
More and more stuff is going missing, and it seems to have been spurred on by Sydney acknowledging the stealing in the first place. If it is the Elephant Man, then he could just be stealing partly for the attention of the camp. If that's true, then it could show that he has big plans in the works, which includes getting the attention of the whole camp. Lunchtime! Sydney encourages the culprit to come forward in private, so they don't get in trouble with Lucille. A lot of counselors had things stolen, including Lucille's mahogany grandfather clock, and a photo of Sydney that Jedediah keeps on his desk, which Sydney is surprised about. Sydney is spooked because everything that was stolen are objects typically used in a magic ritual, except the photo, apparently. Next announcements. Whoa, something's wrong. It's not dinner time yet. Why are we getting an announcement? The first thing we hear on the announcements is Marisol consoling Sydney. She asks where Jedediah is, probably trying to get him so, he can help calm down Sydney. Sydney responds that he doesn't want to bother him with this.
Nonsense. He's here,
Sydney admits that he's been seeing the Pink Elephant Man all around all week, but didn't want to raise alarm because he wasn't 100% sure. But just moments ago, he saw him up close. Sydney was picking flowers and saw the Elephant Man crawling out of a window with a tea set. Again, I have to encourage you to listen to this podcast without me spoiling it, because this is such a good scene and might be one of my favorites in the show. I enjoy this moment quite a bit, and I don't want this shitty summary thing obviously won't do it justice, and it will just ruin it, because it's
Cindy goes on to describe the Elephant Man, saying that he has long arms. Marisol excitedly interrupts the story by asking Cindy to describe the Elephant Man's robe. Apparently, the Elephant Man has updated his wardrobe. That clarifies the word updated means that he was not wearing the robe before this day, or like since the last time he was seen.
He updated his wardrobe. Last time I saw him, I knew that his outfit was familiar. This time, I saw it clearly. Hospital scrubs. This time he had a... Was it a robe? I thought it was a cape.
Definitely a robe.
Alright, a robe. A purple star-patterned wizard robe. You know, the kind you'd get from, like, a costume store.
He updated his wardrobe, and this time he had a robe. Again, he just got it. I don't know why I feel the need to emphasize that he just got the robe, but it feels like it's a detail that I enjoy. And I don't know how to describe why fully, at least not right now. Very funny imagining the Elephant Man just walking out of the woods after God knows how long to go get a wizard's robe, or just randomly finding the robe in the middle of the woods. But why the new robe? I mean, I don't know how else he would have gotten it. I just like the detail. That it's a new robe, he didn't always have it, so he had to have gotten it. So, but why the new robe? The show suggests that the impact of his power is influenced by how much skin he's showing. So him getting something that would cover a large portion of his body seems to imply that he wanted to subdue his power somewhat or control it better. Again, he was in the woods for at least a year before, and he seems to have just begun putting effort into lessening his power. Him subduing it would make it easier for him to sneak around and not have his fervor felt and pinpointed. The robe is described as a purple, star-covered wizard's robe, and despite the robe being new to his wardrobe, it's covered in dried blood. I don't know. Cindy was also able to pinpoint what he was wearing beneath the robe. Blood-stained scrubs. Cindy also states that the scrubs were familiar. Back to the actual story that Cindy was telling, where he saw the Elephant Man climbing out of the window with a tea set. With the pink Elephant Man near him, a feeling Cindy describes as desecration takes over. Unlike everyone else, Cindy doesn't feel the fervor. As previously established, he feels drugged. Just very, very tired. Cindy collapses to the ground, and the Elephant Man does not move from his position. He doesn't seem to care about getting away anymore with the tea set. He himself seems entranced by Sydney to the point where he drops the tea set and a glass shard of it scratching him, but he doesn't care. He reaches his arms towards Sydney. Sydney's autonomy has been stripped away from him due to the lethargy, and he can't find the strength to care that this man is coming towards him, and he wasn't even scared.
I observed dully, like a doll atop a shelf, as this strange man gave in to his temptation to steal me away.
The Elephant Man is truly described as eager to take Sydney, but despite his clear wanting, his outreaching is still described as somewhat tenderly.
To extend his arms like a mother welcoming her newborn child.
It would be odd if this action was him trying not to scare Sydney away because he already has him practically physically restrained with his powers. So I believe this momentary calmness was purely for his sake. Somewhat as an act of reverence, he was savoring the moment and didn't want to be hasty as to ruin the moment. His fervor influenced Marisol to do something she wouldn't typically do and tackled him.
All the feelings I'd been too dull to feel came rushing into my body. Fear, curiosity, disgust, the sense of violation, the sense of objectification.
Violation and objectification are good words to remember throughout the course of this podcast. The Elephant Man got away in a way that Marisol cannot remember after tackling him. He runs away laughing. Marisol jokingly describes his laugh of that of a cartoon prince, and Sydney agrees that he does have a handsome laugh. Marisol and Sydney plan on going to Lucille to get her to do something for her. Sydney says he's talked to Jedediah about anything, but not anymore.
He tries to justify this change as healthy because Jedediah shouldn't have to listen to all of his issues and doesn't need to listen to his bullshit anymore. He again goes to self-deprecation to try and justify Jedediah not wanting to spend time with him as much. He typically doesn't want to even consider that Jedediah not spending time with him is just because he doesn't want to, and that there must need to be a specific reason. Sydney then breaks and admits that he doesn't go to him because he doesn't feel like he'll listen to what he has to say. He went to Lucille and she was all around non-committal about dealing with the Elephant Man. He also reveals that because Lucille rarely does anything, Sydney typically solves the non-dire problems himself.
You tell Jedediah about this. This is the first time in a long time I've felt like I was actually in danger. Maybe it'll be enough to make him react.
Marisol encouraged him to talk to Jedediah about the Elephant Man and only seems to consider it because he feels like he's in danger. And Jedediah enters stage left. He had to do a quick job for Lucille all day and wants to check in on Sydney real quick. Sydney confirms that the Elephant Man is real and tries to appeal to him by again bringing up that the Elephant Man stole Jedediah's photo of him and trying to get him involved. He can only think of using something that he personally lost and not the fact that Sydney himself feels in danger. Sydney says that he's scared and Jedediah actually consoles him. He knows how much Sydney's autonomy matters to him, and he feels bad that was taken away from him. That's it. That's what Sydney wanted to hear. He just wanted Jedediah to sympathize with him and comfort him. And then he retracts and brings up that Sydney wasn't really hurt. All he did was make Sydney uncomfortable, but overall seems harmless. I hate him. Crazy thing to say, by the way. And he says that he heard the announcement. He knows that he tried to take Sydney and ran away laughing into the words. Sydney tries to justify why he is a threat, and Jedediah goes off about how he's worried about Sydney's particular fixation on the Elephant Man because so much weirder things and more dangerous shit has happened in the camp. And Sydney has only been scared of this specific guy. It doesn't make sense to him.
Nothing in this camp ever hurts you, Sydney. You are always fine. And the biggest threat that I currently see to your well-being is your own mental health.
This comes off as dismissive. Like, I don't need, like, it's intentionally supposed to be. This is a dismissive thing to say, like, obviously. I'm not. Sydney reiterates that he feels like he's in danger. Jedediah says he'll do something and he'll talk to Lucille. He specifically states that Lucille will listen to him. He knows that Lucille won't listen to Sydney. He plans on trying to figure out why the alarms in the buildings won't catch the Pink Elephant Man too. He encourages Sydney not to stress about the situation either. Sydney tries to get him to play chess with him, but Jedediah says he needs to work on his project. He expects Sydney to feel safe enough for him to leave, and Sydney says he loves him. Episode 7. Sydney is allergic to slime and is currently having a severe allergic reaction. This is because there's a giant mass of slime on top of the bonfire. Despite Sydney's insistence on not wanting people to curse over the announcements, he is currently frustrated enough to tell the counselors to get off their ass and clean the slime. Sydney doesn't really know how to read clocks because he normally just knows the time due to him being an oracle who can tell the time via the bonfire fumes. And Jedediah calls Sydney babe. Lunchtime. The slime on the bonfire is also growing. Lucille is actually getting involved, using her Fens of the Oak, wooden mannequins enchanted to do her bidding, and she's upset that they keep on being absorbed by the slime. The goo has now begun moving and has caused a lockdown in the camp. The counselors had a brainstorming session with Sydney, Jedediah, and Yvonne, who we have not met yet. We have not met Yvonne. Ended up yelling at Joshua for being stupid. After that, they noticed that the goo had shrunk, and they connect that the goo feeds off love, and anger makes it shrink. So all the kids are told to run outside and start shouting things that piss them off. Sydney comes in with a pun, and him and Jedediah start laughing about it. But
he spent an hour and a half coming up with that one.
Get away from the microphone, you prick!
The goo's gone now, and Counselor Soren is looking for large stones, and if the kids find any, go and give it to him. Recorder segment. We finally get another cute moment between Jedediah and Sydney.
I'm gonna put puffy stickers on your lab coat.
And that is why I keep my office locked.
Jedediah leaves and Sydney is left alone. He begins to talk about a centipede in his room, and he's been seeing it for a few days. Centipede mention, woo! The centipede is going to become very important and just a recurring character. Rowan interrupts and asks Sydney for his anti-dark vision medication, anti-augurit, because this guy's freaking him out. He asks Sydney how he's doing, and Sydney says that everyone has been friendly today. I think that's probably because they feel bad about what happened with the Elephant Man and his allergies, so the kids are just being like, extra special nice to him. Episode 8.
My breathing issues are back down to their typical moderate to severe level, and my body is no longer growing tiny leaves out of the ends of my fingernails.
The announcements are interrupted by someone. The Tonys. Oh, thank God. The Tonys. Yay. Every time I listen to this episode, I get really excited about the Tonys. I really enjoy the Tonys. The Tonys are two men with cartoonish New York accents, and they're yelling for Jedediah currently. They've got a package for him. Sydney goes and opens the door, at which the Tonys get their feathers ruffled over the fact that he opened the door without a warning, to which Sydney gets offended and starts yelling at them about how they're rude and interrupted the announcements. Sometimes when I listen to the podcast, I get kind of caught up with the image of Sydney feeling voiceless in his day-to-day life. So anytime Sydney gets to yell at someone, even when it doesn't really contribute much, it kind of gets me amped. And this outburst gains the Tonys' respect. And that's another reason why I really like the Tonys. The first time they show up, they're shown to appreciate Sydney standing up for himself, which is a contrast to how most people seemingly treat him. Sydney feeling like he needs to dial himself down for others is brought up more later on. Though also part 1 of the pairs Jedediah will be introduced to teach him about healthy communication. But that's not in this episode though. But the Tonys will return. The Tonys are also black market delivery men, and they are delivering contraband.
But your husband is definitely a criminal. I mean, definitely.
Jedediah shows up. Sydney convinces them to give him the package instead. They do, pinch his cheeks, compliment him, and say Jedediah is lucky to have him. Again, the Tonys say the things that Sydney needs to hear, and Sydney does not want to give the package to Jedediah. Lunchtime. When the afternoon announcements start, Sydney seems to believe that other people will be able to hear the argument that him and Jedediah are having. Jedediah tries to convince Sydney that the package actually isn't illegal, and then he gets frustrated and fucks off. And believe it or not, Jedediah has been getting more closed off. While he was out of the room brainstorming a game plan on how to get back his package, he uses the fact that Sydney desperately wants to know what's happening with him, why he's distant, why he has contraband, etc., to his advantage, and offers answers to questions in exchange for the package. Sydney agrees as long as it's on the announcements, and the kids can hear them. Jedediah gets frustrated, which I get that, yeah. If you want to share some personal information, you probably don't want a horde of children listening in.
So why bring it up? I just don't want you to power trip, okay? You're only yanking me around because I'm letting you.
You know, for a good Christian boy, you can be very prideful.
I'm not Christian. Why are you telling them I'm Christian?
Christian in origin.
Sydney switches from the power tripping claim to bring up something Jedediah seems defensive about. Anyway, the answers to Sydney's questions include: some people would try to thwart him if they found out about his project that he's working on. Said people are powerful. Powerful seems to include the government and others. Jedediah agrees to one more question, and Sydney specifically asks what his project is, and he refuses to say anything about it. Sydney says that he feels that he needs to hold his mail over his head to get answers, and Jedediah thinks Sydney should respect his boundaries. He then fucks off again without his package. Dinner announcement time. The Faceless Deer took back something that she left there last summer, and Counselor Marianne is missing. Soren has all the stones he needs, and he's smiling and rubbing his hands together mischievously. Sydney thinks that Jedediah was right, and admits that he was using the package as a way to gain some semblance of control in his life. And just as he's about to give Jedediah back his package himself, Jedediah arrives and he says that he needs to give him back the package because Lucille said so. Recorder time. Sydney recounts how they talked, and it said that Lucille immediately went to support Jedediah despite how out of character that seems. Which of course upsets Sydney because he's constantly trying to go to Lucille for help, and when Jedediah just mindlessly vents to her, then stuff actually happens. Man, it kinda seems like Lucille and Jedediah have some kind of relationship that Sydney and her does not. Despite Sydney admitting that he was kinda immature, he still justifies it somewhat on the basis that it was illegal contraband and Jedediah just brought it into a summer camp, and because of the symbol on the side of the box that Sydney knows.
It's the symbol for the fairy market, a government network for heavily regulated substances, magical regions, and machinery.
Sydney seems embarrassed that he apologized because, again, he feels like he was forced into that position anyways. But he didn't want Jedediah to be angry with him, so the reinforcing of Sydney's powerlessness is topped off with him not even being able to give the package back himself. The Elephant Man has been stealing his diary recordings. Episode 9. Oh boy, episode 9. So, Sydney isn't in this episode, and it's about Jedediah mediating an argument between counselors. The concept of Jedediah, someone who's clearly established not to be good at communicating with the person that he cares most about, being put in charge of handling communication issues, is funny. Along with the comedy aspect of these episodes are another way of showing Jedediah more healthy communication options. Anyways, he mediates an argument between two counselors of the same cabin, Yvonne Longley and Joshua McKee. We get to hear Joshua speak. The show again shows its knack for introductions when we meet them. We observe that they're both kind of childish, Joshua more so than Yvonne. They also seem to be friends with that kind of rapport with each other. And Jedediah seems to be partially annoyed with Joshua. They're arguing about having Juniper hang out in their cabin because his kids keep trying to kill him, and the kids found his dad's phone number and they are threatening to call him and tell him where Juniper has really been working. Joshua wants him gone, and he thinks that he should be able to stand up for himself. He also thinks Juniper is intruding on his turf and is overriding his control over his cabin. And Yvonne calls him a bitch. Joshua brings up the natural order and Jedediah laughs at him. He encourages Joshua to continue talking about his alpha male bullshit because he thinks it's funny, until Joshua gets too into it and he tells him to stop. Yvonne says Joshua's just pissy because the kids like Juniper more. Joshua has the aim of teaching the kids valuable life lessons, and he thinks that Juniper is distracting them. I actually appreciate this aspect of Joshua. He's not just upset because of someone encroaching on his territory. He's partially upset because he wanted to help the kids learn important skills, because he genuinely cares about them. He then brings up survival of the fittest, and because Juniper was outcasted by his cabin, I think he implies he should wander off into the woods and disappear. Yvonne calls him a bitch again. Joshua brings up something that I agree with. Jedediah is bad at mediation. While I do agree that Joshua is in the Vaughn primarily, Jedediah expressly states that he doesn't really care and is just trying to get through this. He is here to mediate, but to be fair, I'm pretty sure there's a deeper reason why he's so blunt and non-caring. The audience doesn't know this yet, but to put it vaguely, they all personally know each other outside of camp, Yvonne, Joshua, and Jedediah. And the whole ordeal feels commonplace enough, and he knows Joshua, so he feels comfortable enough to make fun of him a little bit. He's still shit at mediating though. And shock and horror, Jedediah's distant behavior is hurting more people than just Sydney. Joshua reveals that Yvonne has been ranting to Joshua about how she hates how distant he's been. Even without the knowledge of them knowing each other outside of camp, you can tell they have some kind of relationship with each other. And it would be safe to assume that he's not close with every counselor, so this is like like some kind of friendship between them. And surprisingly, Jedediah brushes this off. Joshua comes clean and admits that he's jealous of how the kids like Juniper. He tries really hard and thinks Juniper is just irresponsible, and Yvonne has been ignoring him. Yvonne comforts Jedediah and clarifies that she does appreciate Joshua, looks in the camera, and after they both understand each other better, they reinstate how much they care for each other, looks at camera, and they both apologize to each other. Yvonne doesn't seem sure that she's going to see Jedediah anytime soon. She and Joshua leave. He doesn't like Joshua, he likes Yvonne, and is frustrated that Sydney makes him do this.
Christ, Sydney. Why do you make me do this job? I'm so tired. These meetings never go anywhere. Sometimes I think you just like seeing me flounder and fail at things. Do you like it?
And immediately regrets saying that and plans to get rid of the tape. So Sydney teases him. That's something we see. And we do also see Jedediah get genuinely frustrated with this. But it never seemed like Jedediah misunderstood that he was just trying to fuck with him a little. But it never seemed like Jedediah misunderstood that Sydney was just trying to mess with him a little bit. But this specific odd outburst seems to happen because I have to assume this episode takes place after the whole box debacle. And through Jedediah's perspective, Sydney was power tripping for reasons he doesn't truly understand, and then attempted to air his personal information to the whole camp for what Jedediah assumes is for their entertainment in that episode. So he's reasonably still heated about that, and at that moment assumes Sydney enjoys him floundering, but I think he realizes that's harsh and Sydney is not vindictive like that, especially not towards Jedediah. Episode 10. Cabin Dunbeetle starts to revolt because of their chores, and Sydney seems to be accidentally encouraging the kids to get pissed off. But other cabins may also revolt, so don't. Sydney also thinks that a week of cafeteria duty is too harsh of a punishment for trying to kill Juniper, and implies if he was one of Juniper's kids, he also might have blackmailed him. He tries to talk down the revolt by telling the kids that the adults are also scared and powerless. Lunchtime. The revolt seems to have begun and Sydney is trying to persuade them to stop. Sydney tries to relate to their plights by saying that all of his peers as a child were out to get him and
everyone who had the power to help me was negligent, incompetent, callous, and dumb at best.
Man, I wonder why he seems to care so much more about the children and constantly gives them benefit of the doubt, even when unjustified, and in comparison he treats the adults / his current peers like they totally don't matter. Man, that's a mystery, wow. He also clarifies that Lucille has a flamethrower and she's going to use it if they don't calm down. Lucille is now holding dinner hostage, which split the kids into two groups. Those for revolution and those for dinner. Also, the mediation episode was happening simultaneously with this one, and at this point I have to assume that all the buildings are soundproof to hell and back. Sydney offers to take all the chores himself to stop fighting. Dinner time. The battle continues and Sydney's panicking is interrupted by Jedediah entering. He has written a peace treaty. Quarter. Sydney appreciates Jedediah stepping up with a peace treaty. He has also been shown to be frustrated with how little Jedediah seems to help him around the camp, so of course he'd like it when he actually does something notable. He's been seeing the Elephant Man a lot more frequently. He seems to have tried to take Jedediah's comment into account about him being harmless, but he still makes Sydney wildly uncomfortable. But he distracts himself by just reverberating what Jedediah said to him, that he just stresses himself out for no reason. More arbitrary robberies are happening around the camp, and it's hard to tell if the Elephant Man or other campers are taking advantage of the opportunity. He also thinks that the kids don't respect him and he's powerless to influence them at all. It also turns out that Sydney also brought up the peace treaty before Jedediah did, but was turned down and is confused on why it's different when Jedediah brought it up to her instead. He quickly interrupts his own justified questioning with,
Lucille, loves me. Jedediah is right. Lucille loves me. Jedediah is right. Jedediah loves me. Lucille is right.
This chant seems choreographed, like he constantly needs to remind himself of that idea. It's also notable that it's something that he needs to put effort into reminding himself, and this isn't just something that he intrinsically knows or has existing faith in. I think this repeated attempt at reassurance can be seen when he says he was able to talk down Lucille from the rampage with the penguins, and that she would never punish Sydney because she loves him too much, but it's shown that might not be accurate. So this is just a common enough thing he does that's implemented into his everyday speech. Episode 11. Today there will be a tower building contest, and at the end the tower that stands strong after an onslaught of physical and verbal assault will win. This is also a mandatory activity, so everyone has to participate, and Sydney actually got Lucille to sign off on something he suggested, but he had to get Jedediah to bring it up to do so. So I'm assuming he's using what he learned in last episode of Jedediah being able to do what Sydney can't, even if it's the same suggestion, and is now using that to actually get what he wants. Lunchtime.
Lately, all I've dreamt about is this weird guy who wears red paisley suits and invites me to sit down across from him and tries to make me talk about how my mother hurt me. And that's when I get any sleep at all.
Important quote. While the kids were playing fair, the counselors started to have a pissing contest to see which cabin could make the best tower. And Sydney's upset that they're turning a team building exercise for the kids into a challenge. Counselor Soren is missing, and Jedediah isn't helping Sydney build a tower for the nurse's cabin. Shocker. Dinner time. Cabin Dunbeetle won the tower building contest. A counselor got pissed off about losing and shook Juniper around a bit, leading to a battle between cabins. And during that confusion, the winning tower was somehow stolen, and Sydney expects it was stolen by the Elephant Man. Somehow. Then Matthew the chef enters and whispers incomprehensible nothings into the microphone, and Joshua lost his wallet in the forest. Quarter. Sydney feels abandoned by Jedediah, and to try and make him feel bad, he puts his little tower he made near his office. You remember that little mantra Sydney was repeating to himself? Jedediah loves me, Lucille is right, yada yada. It seems that the attempt at self-reassurance has shattered. Jedediah not helping him build the tower has opened the floodgates to all of his insecurities. Jedediah is all talk, no action when it comes to showing affection, and Sydney needs to be shown actions outside of words to be convinced. Jedediah still loves him, and the back and forth of insistence Jedediah gives that he cares for Sydney with no follow-through leaves Sydney, quote, confused and lonely. He questions if he's doing something wrong to cause Jedediah to be drifting away. I don't remember if it's stated in an episode, but I think he keeps thinking it's his fault because he wants a reason. Somehow, even if it's hurting him, he wants to have control in the situation. He doesn't want to believe that Jedediah might not be spending time with him or may not even like him as much anymore for his own separate reason outside of Sydney himself. Because he can't fix it if that's the cause. So it's simpler, not better, to follow that line of reasoning. He's also scared to attempt to talk to other people because he fears that he might drop them away too.
If I told my 13-year-old self that this is where I would be and this is what I would be doing, he'd probably cry.
Sydney. God, I love the show. That's such a very sad line. Dude. He also questions himself about the Elephant Man again, because everyone else seems so calm about him, so maybe he shouldn't worry. And that him being so worried is him being delusional and stupid. Then we get the Centipede cameo. Woo!
I see myself, my child self, sitting in the corner. He's in trouble. He's crying, but he can't move. And the centipede is climbing up his back. The child will die from malnourishment, and the centipede will eat his body. One day, I'll feel it crawling around under my skin. Good night.
I'm gonna be real for a second.
The centipede shows up a couple times, and I don't feel I have a full grasp on what it presents, at least as, I don't know, it shows up when Sydney's in distress. Maybe it's an omen. I'll continue to try to build what I think it is. I could just be stupid when it comes to that kind of shit. I don't know, don't think lesser of me because I don't get the centipede, please. Episode 12. Sydney lived in a very dirty house as a kid, and again, didn't like his mother. In the backyard, there were lilacs growing, and he would eat them because his mom couldn't afford actual food. And the counselors who participated in the violence of yesterday are forced to participate in the Counselor Olympics. Let's give a round of applause for the Counselor Olympics episode. Woof! Woof. It's mandatory, so Jedediah has to participate, which seems like a special exception because he also did not participate in the counselor battle yesterday. But he does need a team building exercise, and I think Sydney just wants to get him out of his fucking office. Okay, lunchtime. Lunchtime or whatever it is. I don't really know if this counts as lunchtime announcements because Sydney is just functioning as a sports commentator in this section. Sydney's outside now. I like how you can hear the sounds of nature in the background. I like the sound design in this episode and the whole show.
We'll move on to the next activity of the day. Gluing cotton balls to Joshua until he, dies? We'll find out.
He fucking hates him. He fucking hates Joshua. Jedediah is actually participating in the Olympics and seems to be trying pretty hard, which of course shocks Sydney. And we're reminded that he has an impressive knack for engineering. Also, the rotting, reanimated corpse of missing counselor Marie Ann showed up and is now participating in the games. I bet you guys forgot about Mary Ann, and I think when I first wrote this, I had to go back to mention Mary Ann because I wanted to mention, because her corpse is back in this episode. Her going missing went unaddressed because each time Sydney went to talk about it, he felt a terrible pain overwhelm him. In between, I don't know what else to call this in between section. Sydney turns on the loudspeakers because he wants to vent, and he's pretty sure the kids are nowhere near the loudspeakers and just wants to talk through something. For the sake of the show functioning, I'm not gonna question that. So Sydney starts to vent. Lucille was present during the Olympics and was constantly talking with Jedediah.
Every time I look over there, she's got him in a football huddle, muttering quietly but vehemently as if going over a game plan, while he just nods along.
But every now and then Lucille goes to talk with Sydney, which is something Sydney's genuinely shocked by. And when Sydney talks about Lucille coming up to talk to him, he says Lucille leaned in and touched his shoulder. That simple touch is apparently the most gentile form of touch Sydney has felt in years. Hey man, I don't know what to say. The response to that is just all kind of right there. She just touched him on the shoulder, and that's the most gentle form of the physical touch that he's felt in years. Dog. So Lucille suggests that Sydney rigs the games against Jedediah so that he'll feel like he's losing his mind. For the funny. She then chats over to Jedediah and acts all motherly towards him, not even giving Sydney the chance to respond. Sydney believes that Lucille wouldn't want to actually hurt him, and he does think it'd be kind of funny to just mess with Jedediah a little bit. Anyways, more Sydney and Lucille lore. When Sydney was a kid and needed to get away from his mother, he would go to Lucille's prison-like but comfortable home and stay there. And the home was filled with taxidermy, but most notably, there was a famed centipede corpse. Centipede, woo! The assurance of the centipede's death very much comforted Sydney. Okay, centipede. Okay, so maybe the centipede represents his old home, and the trap in it represents, because the dead centipede that is in Lucille's home seems to be brought up in contrast with his mother's house. Which may make sense because with the last episode, the centipede is brought up with it eating a malnourished younger version of Sydney. The version of Sydney that existed when living with his mother. Maybe it's his mom? I don't Sydney has trouble remembering that time in depth and questions if he ever lived with Lucille. Despite Sydney rigging the games, Jedediah seems weirdly persistent about trying his hardest and seems genuinely upset when he doesn't win. So Sydney wants to stop rigging the games. Dinner time announcement, so whatever you can call this. The Council Olympics were a failure, and despite not wanting to talk about it, he also doesn't want to keep the kids in the dark. Sydney told Jedediah that the games were being rigged against him, and that Lucille has suggested it. But Jedediah doesn't seem shocked or anything when Sydney tells him. In fact, he seems like he already knew. He asked Sydney to make the games even harder for him.
Got to do this, he muttered in that way that he mutters. You know the mutter. I have to learn. Now, I felt plainly befuddled. I asked, gotta learn what? How to cooperate with your coworkers? Because honestly, I think playing on hard mode isn't the best way to develop that skill. But he shook his head. I've just got to do better, he explained, sounding like he didn't think he should have to explain this. He shook a finger at me, a gesture composed of one part grim confidence and one part nervous resignation. Give me a hard time, okay? We both deserve that.
So for a long time, I didn't really get what was happening with Jedediah. I could just be really stupid. This whole thing is just me wanting to talk about the show that I like. I could be stupid. So for a long time, I didn't really get what was happening with Jedediah and Lucille in this episode. It could be really obvious, I don't know, and maybe I'm just completely off. But what I think is happening was Jedediah somehow convinced Lucille to help him on a quest of self-flagellation. Like, it feels out of character for Lucille to suggest something like that with no reason other than shits and giggles. But previously, she and Jedediah seemed to be working something out between each other, and nothing else was brought up that could have been what they were planning in the episode. And teasing Jedediah seems to be tailored to appeal to Sydney, but not Lucille. And when Jedediah goes off into the games, he seems to tackle it with the determination of someone who knows he needs to try harder. He's not frustrated or confused at the games, he's just upset that he can't do it. And I think him knowing that the game is rigged is confirmed when Sydney tells him. He's not described as shocked or with any notable emotion, he knew. He asks Sydney to make the games harder. He talks like he's punishing himself for something, like the games were his chance to prove himself. Not only that, there's give me a hard time, okay? We both deserve that. We both deserve that. We both deserve that. He thinks he deserves to be punished and thinks Sydney deserves to punish him. It feels like he tricks Sydney into punishing him because he thinks it would make Sydney feel better because he knows he hurt him and doesn't seem to be able to think of any other possible way to address it. And he feels like he needs to be punished by Sydney, seemingly because he feels guilty for hurting him. And he knew Sydney wouldn't initially go along with this, so he got Lucille to seemingly trick Sydney into punishing him. And regretfully, Sydney went along with it because he didn't want to refuse Jedediah's wishes. He continued to rig the games, even after the whole conversation. When Jedediah ended up hurting himself during the games, Jedediah ignored everyone but Lucille and her mannequins. He even refused to let Sydney help him. He seems to only have been able to accept negative attention from Sydney, but not anything else. The corpse of Marianne is gone again, too. She fucked off. She was good at the Olympics. The quarter section. Woo boy! We get to meet Lucille, we get to hear her voice. Sydney is secretly recording the conversation about the special treatment Jedediah gets in comparison to him, and how he doesn't feel respected. But Lucille reassures him that she does love and respect him, but does not address anything beyond that, not confronting why he would think that, just kind of brushing it off. She exhibits a similar problem to Jedediah, that she just says that she loves him without acting on it. She also reassures Sydney that she listens to him and will eventually do something about the Elephant Man. Notably, Sydney really shrinks away during this conversation, just agreeing to whatever she says without any real retort. He seems to be pretty intimidated by Lucille. She also brings up Sydney stressing himself out over nothing, which is something Jedediah also said. she just seems very dismissive. It feels like the relationship is upholded by obligation. That short conversation ends and Sydney leaves, and apparently Marisol told Sydney that a constructed effigy in the shape of the woman is in the woods. Episode 13. Sorry. Someone breaks into the announcement room and is rambling into the mic and telling the kids to go into the woods and confront the Mother of Stone, so that they may share in her glory. Then Sydney enters. I love how Sydney confronts Soren. There's like no malice when Sydney sees him. Soren is just dressed like a stray cat who just so happens to wander into the room.
Hey, what are you doing on my microphone?
I'm sharing the good news!
Get off of there, it's time for breakfast.
And it is also government-mandated normal day. Lunchtime. Soren's ritual worked and there is now a reanimated rabbit corpse wandering around the camp, with Soren skipping and clapping behind it. Sydney waxes poetic about how reanimation is in life and how necromancy is illegal and impossible. This divine abomination is clearly nothing more than an inanimate object on magical strings. Then Jedediah walks in and asks if he can have a private conversation with Sydney, but Sydney reminds him of his philosophy of having the kids know about everything that ever happens in the camp. And if he has something to say to him, he should be able to say it over the announcements. Then Lucille enters the room because she needs to talk with Jedediah in private. When Lucille enters, Sydney immediately shuts off, and when she says she wants to talk in private, the announcements immediately shut off. So his philosophy does not seem to apply to Lucille, possibly because he's just like super intimidated by her and other things. Dinner time announcements. Normal day was a disaster, partly because of how weird it was for Jedediah and Lucille to actually participate in camp affairs. Lucille isn't getting involved out of fear of the camp's stability and legality because there are other things that happened that she completely ignores. But now, magical authorities are on their way because they caught wind of illegal necromancy somehow. Jedediah asks Sydney to help him get rid of the rabbit. Jedediah concludes that the rabbit needs to be dismantled. Sydney goes to do it but is freaked out by the whole thing and hands it off to Jedediah. He seems upset, but he tears the animal apart nonetheless.
But it was somehow worse to see a creature violating every mandate of its animal instincts by simply accepting the pain. Choking down your screams when it hurts so much you feel like you might die is something only humans should do. I'm being silly. I know it wasn't alive. All we did was take apart an object. A toy.
Also, the elephant man is being spotted. He's hanging around. Recorder section. At one point, the rabbit wandered near the edge of camp and was met with the elephant man. And for some reason, the elephant man went to enthrall it by taking off his mask. I don't know what he planned to do after that, but I'd like to think he just did it for shits and giggles, or just to fuck around. But anyways, it did not work, and it not working really freaked him out. He scurried away and watched the rabbit from a bush. Once he doesn't have the capability to absolutely control a creature, he gets unnerved apparently. On the quest for the rabbit, Jedediah and Sydney actually had a chance to talk with each other. And Sydney actually elaborated why the elephant man freaks him out. It's because he makes him feel powerless.
It's because the only thing I can control in my life is my own mind. And he takes that away from me.
He's forced to stay at the camp all year because Lucille treats him for his ailments. And if he doesn't get treated, he gets too sick to walk. He also has to go through Lucille if he wants anything delivered because, for some reason, Lucille is the only one with internet access. What he eats, or when he eats, is all up to Lucille. Sydney also clearly states that he is disabled. So while the physical aspect of his life sucks for Sydney, he takes solace in that he can retract to the mental. But the elephant man causes him to lose trust in his own mental state. And Jedediah misunderstands what he's trying to say. He reassures him that he's safe.
I don't want to be safe. I want you to care about me.
Also, Cindy seems to be having a nice conversation with the red-suited man in his dreams. Cindy talks about how the kids need to keep the bathrooms clean, and reveals that when summer camp isn't happening, he has to maintain the camp all by himself. That's fucked up thing to make him do. It turns out Jedediah and Juniper are also in the room. His cabin, Kevin Dunbeetle, went into the sanatorium to clean it, but it was reported to have a beast roaming around in it.
They say not to eat the seeds or you'll grow a pumpkin in your stomach, and it'll steal all your nutrients until you wither and die. That's supposed to be discouraging, but I, for one, would be pretty excited for such a turn of events. To create new life just by living, to feed myself directly to nature, to exchange my mortal existence for that of a noble squash. It sounds positively romantic. I've always wanted to be killed by something that loved me.
Cindy makes a pun and both him and Jedediah laugh at it. Soren is on cabin arrest and is now fired because he actually pays Lucille to work there. Lunchtime announcements. The Dunbeetle kids now can't clean the sanatorium because they said that the Elephant Man is in the bathrooms. But when Counselor Salem bravely went to check the bathrooms for the guy, she found nothing to even hint that he was in there to begin with. Cindy totally supports the kids and their desires to want to stay away from the bathrooms. And of course, Cindy barely even considers that the kids may be lying to get away with not cleaning. Again, Cindy loves the kids and has complete faith in them. He seems to want to make sure the kids feel listened to and that their fears are acknowledged and taken 100% seriously, as already shown throughout the show so far. I wonder if this desire came from not feeling listened to as a kid and doesn't want these kids to feel like how he did, which is something they established that. I talk about how I think they established that earlier in one of the episodes. And over the announcements, he states that he absolutely believes that the Elephant Man was in the public sanatorium. Meme reference. Give a round of applause for the meme reference.
Would a child really do that? Just come to summer camp and tell lies?
Wow, what a funny meme reference that is. Salem is sure that he was never in there and the kids are just, lying. So there's a disagreement stewing there. Salem enters. Each counselor is allowed to call a mandatory staff meeting each year, and Salem is calling hers right now about Sydney. Dinner time announcements. Sydney is notably more downtrodden. The meeting must have upset him. The meeting pertained to Sydney's oversharing of information, causing the children to become distressed. Even still, he states that he doesn't think the kids were lying about seeing the Pink Elephant Man, but he then immediately goes on blaming himself if they were lying. His habit of venting his emotions through the camp announcements is also an issue that was brought up. God, I like this show a lot. Because, I do not think Sydney should vent his serious mental health issues on the announcements to a bunch of kids. For obvious reasons. But we are constantly with Sydney. We know why he wants to vent through the announcements. He just wants to be heard by someone. And just has the tendency to mindlessly say shit without seeming to realize how strange what he said was. He doesn't, and I don't want Sydney to rant over the announcements because I want him to have a healthier avenue of relief. But again, it's an issue that he is saying this shit over the announcements. For punishment reasons, Sydney will have to clean the bathrooms by himself, which Sydney states will cause a pain flare-up. And I think Sydney cuts himself off from saying I love you to the campers because he interprets him saying any of his emotions now as oversharing. And if I'm right about that sad face, colon, parentheses. And in episode 3, Sydney states that Lucille loves him too much to punish him, which again is shown to be obviously not true. Recorded segment. Salem's chill. She's a good person. Good person. She just wants the kids to be safe and thinks Sydney going on about possibly dangerous topics could put them in danger. And she seems to have not wanted Sydney to get punished, just told off a bit. Sydney understands the sentiment, but really believes the intelligence of the kids. That if they weren't told what was happening, they would get suspicious and possibly hurt themselves trying to figure it out for themselves. and keeping them in the dark will leave them unprepared for possible danger. And both these hypotheticals are something Sydney relates to. Grown-ups keeping things from him and him getting hurt trying to figure it out. And Sydney did actually have something during the announcements. If you remember, Marisol helped Sydney initially spread information about the Elephant Man. Let me quickly get this out of the way. I like Marisol a lot. She's just chill, a genuinely compassionate person. A genuinely compassionate person and obviously cares about Sydney's emotions and situations. She's not on a lot of the show, but Marisol, my beloved. But because she also spread fear about the Elephant Man with Sydney when he was initially approached, when the Elephant Man was stealing a tea set, she also has to help clean the bathrooms. Sydney thinks this is unfair, and Salem does too. And that's the end of this episode. Oh, now we're back. The recorder starts back up when we hear Sydney. The bathrooms were completely clean when they went in. A tall red candle with the smell of mischief was left in there. What character has been mentioned with an association to the color red? I mean, Sydney has been dreaming of a man in a red paisley suit, but that's just a dream. When Sydney comes back into the cabin, he saw Jedediah fiddling with the clock, and Marisol offered to hang out with Sydney, and he did. A couple of episodes ago, Sydney was basically crying, saying that he was scared of trying to talk to anyone because he felt like he would drive them away. Now he seems excited about hanging out with Marisol. Episode 15. We get another mediation episode, and this one's even more on the nose, with Jedediah needing to learn about communication in a relationship. The mediation episode is between Salem and Marisol, and they decide to clean the sanatorium again while they're there. Salem feels like an asshole for getting Sydney in trouble. I think this mediation session functions as a mirror to Jedediah and Sydney's relationship, with Salem as Jedediah and Marisol as Sydney. Marisol's perspective in the actual current argument is...
My name is Marisol Yuchenko, and I'm very concerned about the Elephant Man. I love Salem, but I don't think her priorities are right. I'm worried by the fact that she called a whole emergency meeting yesterday just to advocate for keeping the kids in the dark, when we could be focusing the same energy on actually dealing with the problem.
So in this conversation, I again think Marisol is a Sydney standing.
And while I agree that the Elephant Man is a problem, there's no need to involve the children. What, do we expect the kids to help us catch him? No, it's our responsibility to take care of these issues before the kids have to worry about them. They're here to have fun, for heaven's sake. Also, I'm sorry, Jedediah, but Sydney is out of control, and that deserves priority too. He has a long history of making his emotional instability the whole camp's problem, and the kids don't deserve to have to deal with that.
Marisol's connection to Sydney's perspective is a lot more on the nose than Salem's with Jedediah, at least currently. One reason I like this episode is we learn about other people's perspectives on Sydney. This episode has a lot of back and forth, and I think it would be hard to recap, but I think it contains great character work and strengthens all the characters involved. Again, just go listen to it, please. Marisol defends Sydney against the notion that all he does is vent over the announcements, as he does put on an effort to appear chipper, which is true. We hear through the recorder how much effort Sydney puts into hiding his deeper emotions, and Jedediah actually attempts to defend Sydney in this conversation. And when we get to the stronger connection between Salem and Jedediah's perspective, she questions what the Elephant Man has actually done to endanger anyone, despite their partner insisting he's dangerous. Salem backtracks that the way Sydney talks about the Elephant Man isn't the best way to warn the camp, but Marisol brings up that he's most qualified because he has the most experience with him. Salem accidentally discredits everything Sydney is going through and seems to insinuate he's over-exaggerating, which Sydney and Jedediah argue against. Marisol defends Sydney against the way he's being talked about, like he's a lunatic.
And what about me?
Sorry?
I'm terrified by the way that man made me feel. What about my safety?
Of course that's important to me, but
What about Sydney's safety? Even if the kids are totally fine, we have camp personnel being actively stalked and harassed. And it seems like I'm the only one who cares about this at all. Nobody else seems to care or even see it as an emergency for us. And I'm just confused and kind of hurt because it feels kind of like people don't care about me. And I can only imagine Sydney feels that same way times 10.
Thank you, Marisol. Salem genuinely wants everyone to be safe. Then Jedediah, feeling very exposed for completely unknown reasons, genuinely asks Marisol why she's freaked out by the Elephant Man. He also asked earlier why she's even scared of someone who hasn't done anything. This mirrors what he asked Sydney in an earlier episode, and just like Sydney, she responds,
Marisol, what makes you think he's any different than the other stuff that happens around here?
Because it feels different.
And when he was talking with Sydney, that's when he became completely lost, but Marisol adds something very important.
I'm very scared, and Sydney is too. Shouldn't that be enough?
Well,
And Jedediah flounders a bit at that. And to better illustrate my view of the mediation episode being a lesson for Jedediah on how to communicate, Salem doesn't do what Jedediah did in his and Sydney's conversation. She agrees. She admits that she should focus more on Marisol's well-being, and Marisol agrees that Sydney's way of sharing information isn't the best. They come to a mutual agreement about how to help each other. They say I love you to each other, and Salem agrees to back Marisol up when they go to Lucille about the Elephant Man. They come to a mutual understanding and decide to help each other. They both leave, but apparently there's no one outside of the sanatorium. They don't know where anyone is. Jedediah talks to the recorder about how he hopes Sydney would think he did a good job defending him, but he feels like he's being manipulative and tries to flush the tape down the toilet. He's clearly not trying to hurt Sydney. He just seems lost about what to do and confused. Episode 16. The whole camp is very, very sleepy, and Sydney questions if the Elephant Man somehow amplified his powers over the entire camp. But he is too tired to care. And because he's so tired, Sydney starts talking about his dreams as stories for the camp. Hey, remember the dream Sydney has been having with a man in a red suit? Where we finally get to know more about what takes place in them. Another sidetrack? Blue, the voice actor for Sydney, does a really good job. Especially in this scene. Sydney does this thing where he sometimes imitates people to either make fun of them, such as with Joshua Wan putting on this whiny, annoying voice because he hates his ass so much. And now, when he's truthfully trying to copy someone's vocal inflections. And Sydney's copying the voice of the man in the red suit in his dreams, and it causes him to put on a voice we've never heard from Sydney. The unfamiliarity the listener has with the voice generally enhances unease, and the voice itself is very descriptive. I don't know if this makes sense as a description, but it just feels like unemotive eagerness, like animalistic joy. And I'm sorry if the description doesn't make sense, but I really like the voice acting. And I don't know how to describe why this is impactful to me, but the fact that it's being relayed and isn't something we get to hear for ourselves is really creepy to me. He remembers even the inflections of his speech, and the fact that little inflections like that are so notable, is impactful. I don't know.
Come, dine with me. He smiles.
Anyways, the dream. Wait, not yet. Another thing I haven't mentioned is that every day during the morning announcements, Sydney describes the color of the sky, which is always something irregular and notably never blue. But in the dream it is. And Sydney seems somewhat astonished by it, calling it apocalyptic. The blue sky is something that is brought up again later. Okay, actual dream time. The man in the red suit looks like Jedediah sometimes, and is devouring the shit out of an apple. He urges Sydney to eat with him. Anyways, I'm not gonna convey it properly, but as mentioned before, he exhibits
creepy enthusiasm and like a leering tenderness in his voice. When Cindy says he's not hungry after being offered an apple, he says,
"My dear," he says lovingly, "you're always hungry."
So this is an important line to keep in mind for Cindy's development and some future scenes. We learn that the man knows some personal things about Cindy.
"Call me old-fashioned," the man says, "but where I'm from, it's impolite to turn down a meal once offered. Go on, Sydney. Have a bite."
So he's politely pressuring Cindy to eat, and he continues to go to town on an apple. He then bites into his fingers while eating and very much enjoys the taste. When Cindy bites down on his apple, he finds a 1, 2, 3 centipede. This might strengthen my interpretation of it representing his childhood environment. Again, Cindy was starved of food as a child, and the centipede hiding in an apple could show this action could lead to a confrontation of his past. Also, obviously, the apple and the tree of knowledge, and if you're gonna use a fruit to represent the tree of knowledge or whatever, is more commonly than not gonna be an apple. And Cindy partaking in the food shows that he has access to knowledge he didn't have before. And if I'm right about the centipede, it's about his past. Cindy wakes up choking, which could be assumed to just be the mind playing tricks, but it could also show that the dream affects him in real life. It's lunchtime and everyone is still tired, and it's proof that the Elephant Man isn't behind the sleepy, because he's passed out face down in the grass. And we also get another Cindy dream sequence. This one's a lot. He's in a backyard behind a house he says he just moved into with his latest guardian. He's 7 and has little faith in the arrangement. He's picking at dirt and describes he likes animals.
"I like animals because they never forget to be scared of starving, of getting eaten, of getting hurt or sick."
This is another important statement for Sydney. There's an ant on his arm, and after a moment of staring at it, he proceeds to flail and be an animal. He falls back into an ant pile and becomes covered in them. They begin to bite him, and he starts having a hard time breathing. He then passes out and wakes up in a hospital and is told he can't go anywhere without an inhaler. He chastises himself for not being an animal. He finishes the story, and he brushes off the dream, seeming like a clear memory because the sky was blue, and the ants were small, and the birds could not speak, and because of all that, it must have not been real, it must have not been a memory. Hey, in another dream, wasn't the sky blue there too? Like one we just heard about? This scene is super confusing right now, and later down the line it becomes more so, because later we learn that Cindy lived with his mother at least until he was 17. So even if we are to at least consider the guardian part is somewhat truthful, then Cindy would have to have been shopped around in what might be foster care, and would have to have been given back to his mom at some point, and even if it was other relatives, still. And we learn that Sydney and Jedediah have known each other since they were children. And if Sydney was moved around a lot, then how would he have been able to physically hang out with Jedediah? It feels like it would be mentioned if they hadn't seen each other for a while as children because he was moving around. But either way, this isn't just a dream, obviously. Like, it's notably a normal world to the listener, and that would be so odd if it wasn't meant to be looked into. Both of Cindy's dreams seem to happen in a world that looks more like ours. In his dream, maybe his dreams are linking him to somewhere else. Dinner time announcements. Everything's okay now. This episode was happening simultaneously with the last one, and everyone was in the sanatorium. And everyone that was in the sanatorium wasn't affected by the sleepiness. Jedediah called his clockwork buddies and fixed the clock that was causing the whole thing. So, Jedediah owns a clock that can cause time to slowly stop to a complete halt. And he knows people who are experienced enough with this issue to just come by and fix it. Connections, yes, connections. And Counselor Mila is going to make Sydney some garlic bread. So that's yippee, that's a yippee. Okay, recorder segment. Sydney didn't tell the kids the whole dream with the man in the red paisley suit. He didn't just take a bite of his fingers, he chewed off his whole arm, getting blood on him, and when Sydney bit into the centipede, he actually chewed and swallowed it. Then the man ripped out his own heart and began to eat it. This does kind of confirm what Marisol said in the last episode. He does try to hide things he doesn't think the kids should hear, even if that perspective is kind of odd, but he does try to hide things he doesn't think that the kids should hear. Whether or not he's a good judge of that, he does try. Also, the elephant man came up to his window to stare at him. This is something Sydney has become used to. But when he was standing there, the power in the cabin went out, and once that happened, the elephant man started freaking the fuck out and ran away screaming. Episode 17. Lake Day. When him and Jedediah were kids, Jedediah would swim around while Sydney kicked sand into the pool.
He in his nerdy little Star Wars themed swim trunks, and me in full Victorian morning dress.
Again, with this show, I like little characterization details. I don't think Jedediah being a nerd / geek, I don't know the right term, was mentioned until now, but just having more neutral information on Jedediah than him just fucking up right now makes him feel more like a person. He already did feel like a person, with it being clear he has complex emotions about everything, but you know what I mean. I like little characterization details, like stupid interests they had. I also like Sydney always liked more gothic fashion.
Childhood. To think, back then I thought my life couldn't possibly get worse.
Kids keep peeing into the wormhole in the lunchtime. Jedediah has yet to come out of his office. He's about to start venting about it, then he realizes that that's why he got in trouble in the first place for it. A lot of counselors have reported seeing the elephant man wandering around, and Salem and Marisol seem to have advocated for stopping Lake Day for safety reasons. It's nice we actually get to see Salem backing up Marisol when trying to make people aware of the elephant man. Sydney is on their side but is pessimistic that they won't get anything done. Dinner time. Sydney starts the announcements very grimly. One thing Sydney thinks is important for the kids to learn is futility. He encourages the kids to learn from their mistakes and experiences.
You don't have to be like me and the ants. You don't have to spend your life fighting for something that will just get torn away from you by the random winds of fate.
So Sydney clearly states he fights for things he knows he can't have and is most clearly talking about Jedediah, but can be literally applied to a lot of things. He also encourages that struggling for something won't get them anything, so something seemed to happen to the camp. Lucille didn't seem to care about the threat of the elephant man and the bees. By the way, the bees were an issue, and of course didn't cancel the kayak race. Counselor Mila was patrolling the lake, and she saw the elephant man on the outskirts. He was fiddling with a beehive, and when he noticed Mila, he made a shushing motion, and with the beehive motioned towards the camp. Later, bees stormed the camp, and Jedediah actually acted as co-nurse with treating the kids. So that's what caused Sydney's futility rant. The camp getting fucking ambushed by bees. The quarter. Sydney's worried that he was too grim for the kids that day. He feels emotionally like shit and completely left in the dark by Jedediah.
I can withstand any pain as long as it has meaning.
Which kind of confirms what I said earlier about him wanting to blame himself over anything else. Now it confirms, just like adds credence. If Jedediah gave him any explanation as to why he's been drifting away, Sydney says he could handle it. He's hurt and confused and is now looking at himself for an explanation as to why Jedediah is drifting away and being way too self-critical, making himself bend over backwards so he can try to please Jedediah. And all the goodwill he had for Lucille finally ran out. For the past 3 years, she has put no effort to show she cares about him, while simultaneously being generally agreeable with Jedediah. But today, when she didn't do anything to protect the kids from the elephant man, he just gave up all hope with her. He was somewhat fine when this was something that was just affecting him, but he really cares about the kids and how clearly she dismissed the issue.
and to dismiss the issue that was putting them in danger caused him to give up. He questions if he might give up on Jedediah soon too.
But he must love me, right? Or he wouldn't act that way.
But just as he's about to sign off, Jedediah barges in very panicked. He questions if someone else could be listening to his recordings and asks him to turn it off. And Cindy, of course, does not do that. Cindy questions why Jedediah has been acting like a freak. And then something magical happens. He apologizes. Jedediah apologizes for not taking Cindy's fears seriously. And this, of course, shocks Cindy. Jedediah says that the Elephant Man causing the bee attack was a distraction for him to do something more sinister. When the camp was distracted by the bees, the Elephant Man attempted to break into the cabin they're currently in.
We're lucky I thought to come and check in here. I caught him about to try and kidnap.
Oh my god.
My journals. Sorry?
Who the fuck faces someone trying to steal something as kidnapping? Obviously, the way you phrased it made it sound like the Elephant Man was gonna kidnap Sydney, because he has made clear attempts to get Sydney before. And we don't know what's in the journals, and neither does Sydney. So yeah, this seems totally fucked up. That the only thing that got him to pay attention is because some object he owns may have gotten stolen. But he didn't care when a person he supposedly loves feels like they're in danger. So yeah, Sydney's hurt. Jedediah is deathly serious about this, and Cindy still tries to take advantage of the moment to encourage him to go get Lucille to actually do something. Before he leaves, he assures Sydney that he will keep him safe. Of course, this feels like bullshit to Sydney. We know this is a weird thing to say in relation to a journal. So it seems like someone taking the journal is something that would so clearly put Sydney in danger, at least in Jedediah's mind. Episode 18. Cindy starts off the announcements by talking about a memory he had with Jedediah when they were kids. They would play house. Jedediah was the father and Cindy was the mother. One time they had a fruit fly that they pretended was their child. And Jedediah loved this fly so much he kept it in a container in his room. When it died, he was heartbroken, but Cindy learned he never even fed the fly. He was just admiring a starving animal in a cage. Even back then, Cindy was confused how he could love something yet forget to feed it. Man, I really wonder what Fruity the fruit fly could represent. Lunch announcements. Okay, we get more memories. Another fake child they have while playing house was a bunch of acorns. Jedediah named it Cartagena. Jedediah took her home one day and put her in a bowl. One day, the acorns broke open and revealed maggots had infested them all. Jedediah freaked out and was disgusted by the maggots, but when he was forced to flush the bugs down the toilet, he was again heartbroken.
If he didn't value these creatures when they were alive, why was he so affected by their deaths?
If he didn't value these creatures when they were alive, why was he so affected by their deaths? Despite loving both Cartagena and Fruity, he only cared from a distance. When it actually came to show and care for them, he was completely lost. Cindy stopped killing bugs after that because he remembered how upset Jedediah was. Now with what is currently happening at camp, a beehive washed up on shore by the camp and immediately began to be mothered by all the children at the camp. Sydney finds sweet. But all the adults do feel a deep dread when around the hive, which gets worse the closer they get. All the adults, including Sydney, have a hatred for the hive, and a lot of them are trying to do whatever they can to get the hive away from the children. And there is a staff meeting planned to discuss what to do about the hive. Dinner time announcements. Another memory from Sydney's past. When Sydney and Jedediah grew up enough to not really play house, Sydney suggested a send-off of the game, but Jedediah was freaked out by the prospect of permanently ending the possibility that they could ever play house again. So to try and recapture the magic, they attempted to play house with a rock. But it wasn't the same. At the end of the day, Cindy tossed the rock in a lake, and Jedediah jokes.
He said, abandoning your child in a lake. So that's what motherhood means for you?
And Cindy explains on the announcements that he was right. he couldn't form the same kind of attachment that Jedediah could with their fictional children. When Jedediah was growing up, he experienced love and care in a familial sense, in Sydney's words. And Sydney didn't. His mother was not great. So yes, he considers a mother and abandoning their child to make sense at that moment. He knew it wasn't right and he felt broken because of it. But he said he taught himself what love is.
I do not consider myself a nice person. I'm sure many of my coworkers would agree, even Jedediah probably. But I am not my mother, and any child who comes under my care will learn what it is like to be loved. I have that to be proud of, if nothing else.
I love Sydney so much. I love Sydney. And again, back to current affairs at the camp. During the meeting about the hive, ideas were being thrown back and forth, but notably, during the meeting, Marisol, Salem, and Jedediah were trying to bring up the Elephant Man. But Sydney still seems conflicted about Jedediah now being outspoken about the Elephant Man. Chef Matthew opened the door and let in the terrible feeling that the hive induced. Nearly everyone was out of commission, everyone except Rowan, who proceeded to walk out into the camp. Sydney tried to follow him out, but was stopped by Jedediah. He was able to get close enough to push it into the bonfire. In this episode, I think Sydney was so flagrant about just venting and sharing personal details over the announcements despite what he was told, because he doesn't really care about getting into trouble at this point. He just had Jedediah basically confirm he didn't really care about him, and because, the only time he started caring about the Elephant Man was when he started talking about his own journals, and in Sydney's mind that's obviously very dismissive. And he just wants to rationalize it with past memories of them. Recorder segment. We hear tapes come in and out of the recorder, and then we hear Jedediah. This part. He took Sydney's tape recorder and brought it into Lucille's office to record the conversation. Lucille teases Jedediah about calling Sydney his friend and not any overly sappy nicknames anymore. He asks Lucille if she has heard anything about the Elephant Man, and despite Sydney and other people going to her about it constantly, she doesn't seem to remember. Jedediah describes him, and Lucille is confused as to why he brought up the issue as primarily putting it to Sydney and not the whole camp. And Jedediah says that it's because Sydney is scared, which we obviously know this isn't true because he's completely ignored Sydney when this was his main issue. And even Lucille seems suspicious about this. She starts listing other things that put Sydney in danger, and Jedediah not doing anything about that. So this needs to be different somehow. Jedediah gets offended and clarifies that he has done things over the year. But again, Lucille clarifies that everything that he has done was for his benefit alone. She uses the example of when time was coming to a stop, and he got it fixed to save his projects. Not to save the over 100 people that would be trapped in a fate worse than death in time stasis, but his projects. I'm assuming is probably referring to the projects that have been referred to over the series, but project plural. How many projects does he have, concurrently going on? And I don't think he would have just left everyone there, let alone Sydney. But maybe the project was his primary motivation. And maybe Sydney's included in this project, I don't know. Jedediah says that he's asking about the Elephant Man because he thinks Sydney's in danger, and because he cares about him, which Lucille again teases him and asks why he's just asking her about it now then. It turns out she was lying about not knowing about the Elephant Man. But why would she lie about that? Does she know something about the Elephant Man that she was trying to hide? Was she lying because she didn't want to be confronted about not doing anything? When asked if she cares about Sydney, she responds with, eh. I love how anticlimactic that is. I spent a while waiting to, initially when I was listening to this, I spent a while waiting to see what Lucy was like. And if she was hurting him to such a notable extent, then I would like to know if there's any deeper reason to it. It's kind of funny how while Sydney is going down a spiral and just wanting any reason as to why Jedediah acts a certain way and how he can withstand anything if given a reason, Then we hear about Lucille, who is the other main person we hear about her and Cindy, and in response to asking if she cares about him, she goes, eh. No notable reason, no response, just on if she likes him or not. And Jedediah says why he might not have acknowledged Cindy when he was in danger. He just didn't want to believe it. The thoughts seemed to scare him so much, he just tried to shut it out and hope everything would work out. Lucille mentions Jedediah not caring, which works up Jedediah, and he begins to tear up. At least that's what it sounds like. The man kind of sounds kind of close to tears, a notable amount, but he sounds like he's getting like frustrated. He's starting to get like a frustrated cry going on. He questions why people think the situation is about how much he cares, and states that she needs to do something about the Elephant Man and that he is dangerous. Lucille tries to blow him off, and after him yelling at her to get her attention, we get a reveal.
I've got mountains of paperwork to do, so if you don't mind...
Mom!
Yes?
He tried to steal my journals.
So that could explain why he's been getting special treatment compared to Sydney, and why Lucille and Jedediah seem to have similar attitudes towards things. Also why Sydney went to Lucille's house so frequently as a child. Lucille and Jedediah are similar in many ways, but for now, it can kind of be seen in how they show care. Lucille does seem to care about Jedediah, but she does it in a more subtle way. Ways that may not even be understood as care. This seems similar to how Jedediah shows care. He does what he thinks is good for Sydney. So given that Lucille raised Jedediah with possibly similar standards, it's what he grew to understand. Lucille seems to know at least something about the journals because she seems to understand the severity of them almost being stolen. And apparently Sydney is in real danger if the journals are taken. And Lucille agrees to help, but Jedediah needs to get something off his chest. He's mad about the reanimated rabbit he was made to pull apart.
You know how I am about that stuff. You should have done it.
You know how I am about that stuff. About dealing with gore, death, reanimation, something to remember. But for Sydney, and because he knew Lucille couldn't be bothered to do it, he had to. And to get through it, he looked at Sydney. Wow, parallels. Earlier in the episode, Sydney was talking about why he couldn't kill bugs anymore because each time he wanted to, he thought about Jedediah's little crying face. And now when Jedediah was forced to disassemble a rabbit, he just looked at Sydney's face, you know?
I looked at Sydney. I thought about what would happen to him if people started paying attention to this place. I thought about everything I've already torn apart and tossed away to keep him safe. I thought, what's one more head at the bottom of a lake if it means one more day that he gets to live?
Ooh. So I don't know what's included in people. So something about Sydney needs to be hidden, and for some reason, to keep him safe, he needs to detonate his whole life. Sydney never mentions any of this. He says he's constantly looking for a reason Jedediah might be pulling away. And I'm sure he would have mentioned something that's severe in relation if he knew about this. And he's never mentioned being particularly nervous around government officials. So this major thing affecting Sydney is something Jedediah has somehow kept to himself. And has Jedediah killed people? Are there bodies in the lake? Or was the lake just a metaphor? Because if they are in the camp, then there are people that must have come to the camp that he gathered would be a threat to Sydney. And why, if he's been killing people not in the camp, why even more? Because at least if they were at the camp, they would be an immediate threat. But like maybe the lake's just a metaphor and I'm being stupid. And despite all of his clear issues with it and her clear violent tendencies, she couldn't just kill the rabbit herself.
You couldn't kill a rabbit that was already dead. Don't ever try to tell me I don't care about him. I know I'm bad, but Lucille, you're the worst.
Fuck yeah. Episode 19. Plants in the camp have become unruly, and because Soren functioned as the groundskeeper, and he's on cabin arrest, he's not able to do anything. It's of course notable that Lucille is paid by Soren to work there. He seems deeply interested in reanimating in the land, so these seem to be linked.
Is the campground somehow a better setting for reanimating? He's the only groundskeeper, so is the plant life unique to this area, and can it work as a conductor for his goal? More undead animals have shown up at the camp, so Soren's altar is probably still functioning. So Lucille sends just Sydney to the death fields. Which is really fucked up. Like, even the first time Lucille went with Sydney to the death fields, and Sydney even admits he's not able to disassemble the stone structure himself. And this is something I think Lucille definitely knows. And Sydney is forced to ask others for help with the disassembling. Why would Lucille do that? And right after Jedediah went to her about how he's worried about Sydney. Sydney got Josh who wanted some campers to help him because Jedediah said he couldn't come because he was waiting for a delivery. Lunch announcements. Where's Sydney? Jedediah's on the announcements, and apparently he might need to clarify who he is because some of the kids might not know, which is really funny, he thinks. Sydney talks about this guy constantly and sometimes argues with him, like on the announcements, and the kids know that he is apparently the other nurse despite never really seeing him do that. So the kids have probably formed their opinions on this guy who seems to function as a cryptid. Then he's just over the announcements like, hi, all nervous and panicked and shit. I'm fascinated about how the fucking kids would function in this camp and how there would be so many rumors and like whispers running about. Apparently the trees have formed a barricade around the camp, keeping the people inside of the camp here and everyone outside of the camp there.
Lucille might have figured out a magical solution by now if she weren't, as you're all aware, otherwise occupied.
And it turns out some special guests were also trapped inside the camp. The Tonys. Yes, the Tonys.
Hey, kiddos! Eat your greens!
Apparently, Lucille got upset at the kids for messing with her secret plant that was near the outskirts of the camp. And her reacting to anything is surprising. But she's getting legitimately, really pissed off. And so this has to be something important to her somehow, this lone plant just lying around the camp.
I should not have let Sydney take Joshua out there. I told him it would be a disaster.
The Tonys yell at Jedediah and tell him that he's shifting the blame and how he should have gone with him if he's so worried. Again, the Tonys are included in the group of people that show Jedediah healthier communication skills. Jedediah tries to justify it by saying that he had to meet them for a delivery, and they said that they could have waited and love is more important than appointments. The Tonys make fun of him. Jedediah says he's doing good by Sydney with everything that he's doing.
What you gonna tell him then? Everything's gonna be okay?
Oh, don't worry, kids. I got a super magical safe installed to protect my precious, stupid diary. So there's no need to worry about all your friends trapped in the forest.
Yeah, quack.
And again, making fun of Jedediah for seemingly being very selfish, backing up Sydney when he's not there. Again, a point for them being cruel. Jedediah questions why they care, and they respond that they are just commentating on what they see. The Tonys are essentially the Greek chorus of camp here and there.
The hell is rhetoric?
Words employed to deliberately imply a meaning distinct from the literal interpretation.
Stop cursing at me.
Stop cursing at me is a phrase I routinely think about because I think it's funny. Dinner time announcements. Sydney's back, yay. So the group was trapped in the forest. While in the woods, Sydney was possibly affected by something in the forest that caused him to become incredibly disoriented, twitching, and massive mood shifts. It can't just be because he was away from camp, because we see Sydney function pretty well when he's away from camp for a while. So it has to be something else. Maybe it was the altar itself? Though I wonder why Sydney would be the only one affected when dealing with it. Or is it because he doesn't have any access to the camp at all? Not even the bonfire fumes can get to him, and maybe the severe detachment causes something to go wrong. So everyone was worried about him, and soon Cindy figures out that the trees were upset because one of the campers with them had pocketed an acorn. And the trees were upset that their baby was being kidnapped. After the acorn was returned, the trees opened up and let them out. And Cindy returned back to normal after that. We get more information about the plant Lucille got upset about. Some campers were trying to uproot the plant, but the roots seemed to keep going down. It was firmly planted in the ground. When this was brought up to Lucille, she lost her shit. Threatened to send the kids home, make them sleep on the floor, and find Matthew so they could have no food. Sydney also has no idea what she freaked out about, what was going on with that plant. Also, Soren might have apparently known about it. Recorder segment. Sydney really doubts Jedediah is actually doing anything because, yeah, of course he doesn't think that. And that's confounded with the only thing he sees Jedediah do is install a new safe, so his journal can be kept protected. He's about to talk about something he saw in the forest until he's interrupted by Jedediah.
Just came in to ask if you're doing all right, you know?
That's... Jedediah, why do you even bother?
What?
Sydney truly believes he doesn't care about him that much, so he finally just gave in. The question is, why not just stop pursuing something that apparently isn't there anymore? Something Jedediah didn't think needs kindling. And would it be better if he just moved on? Jedediah becomes flustered and apologizes. Not really an apology for anything specific, just a general apology for something he doesn't really seem to understand. And Sydney still gives him an out to prove that he actually cares about him. All he wants is to play a game of chess with him. But Jedediah says he's too tired and leaves. And again, like I earlier said in the early episode, second confrontation is brought up. He gets scared and runs away. And Sydney gets up to leave with the recorder. It shuts off, and we hear Jedediah. He's recording the tape because he finally wants to get some things off his chest. He says that he's finally realized him being so detached from Sydney has caused some very clear issues. Whoa. We also get a callback to what he said in his conversation with Lucille. That it's not about how much he cares. Here we get clarification that he's not drawn away or doing the things he does that hurt Sydney because he doesn't care. He addresses that he knows his words mean nothing without actions and without any explanation. But he says he can't. And he truly does seem remorseful that he can't explain himself. Because apparently him doing so would put Sydney in danger. And he seems truly sincere. And he admits that he's been purposefully drawn away from Sydney because he's scared of hurting him, but deeply wants to be close with him. This speech from Jedediah is like when I was initially listening to this is the moment that, I started to, sympathize with him. Before, yeah, he had moments of, being a guy who was, freaked out. But, he's, again, we don't really get his introspection shit. So he kind of just seems wishy-washy. I don't know if that's the right term. But this whole speech, him trying to explain himself and seeming sincere when he says that he truly can't, it made me care about him a bit more. And it makes him just generally a more sympathetic character to me. He does care about Sydney, but his lack of action and just consideration made him totally seem like a jackass. The speech adds more complex emotions and motivations to his actions, and his care for Sydney is so evident, no matter if he does fuck up when showing it.
For a long time, I've felt like there's no solution. But I'm talking to you like you always ask me to. Maybe that's a step.
Good quote, good quote. He knew that there was an issue for a long time, but seemed too intimidated by the skill at which it grew to tackle it. And he does seem to acknowledge that he hasn't fulfilled Cindy's simple request of just talking to him, but wants to fix it somehow. While Cindy would still very much want an explanation, this is something he very much needs to hear too. Jedediah then goes to put the tape on Cindy's desk and clicks off the recorder. But suddenly it clicks back on and we hear him very panicked and rambling about how he can't find Sydney and is planning to form a search party and or put the camp on lockdown. Uh-oh. Episode 20. Man, I wonder what's gonna happen. Whoa, another mediation episode, yippee! I think this is a very smart place to put a mediation episode, because Jedediah is at his weakest. He seems to have fully come to terms with how he hurt the person he loves, and right when he works up the courage to try and confront it, that person just goes missing in the forest. And now he just has to stew in the ways that he hurt Sydney, and he's worried sick about anything that's happening to him. He's worried sick about what could be happening, and if anything does happen, it'll most likely be his fault because he didn't do anything earlier. And in the midst of all this, he has to help someone else work through their relationship issues. This episode is about Rowan and Juniper. Do you guys remember Rowan and Juniper? I do. I like that.
Not that Sidney can't go wherever he wishes. And I mean, he deserves a day off, doesn't he, that chap? But with all that he puts up with from the kids and the other counselors, the elephant guy, and from you, no offense.
Juniper was unsure if there was a rumor that Sidney stayed at the camp all year. And he does, Sidney does. He doesn't leave the camp at all. Also, Rowan came back to the camp one year during Cindy's birthday, partially because he felt bad that he was stuck with Lucille. And Lucille didn't even remember that it was Cindy's birthday. And both Rowan and Juniper wonder why they even worked there. Not in an existential way, more in like a genuine curiosity that they don't remember how they got a job there. When Juniper mentions he might come by for Cindy's birthday this year, Rowan makes a snide remark about how he wouldn't put in the effort. Juniper completely ignores that Rowan made a rude comment towards him and just compliments Rowan for being a funny guy. We hear Rowan before, but I think this is where his character is properly established. I stated a while ago that when they set up Rowan's character, they kind of set up this idea of this anxious guy because, panic attacks with this guy constantly. But while he is dealing with constant panic attacks brought on by premonitions about the sky, he's still just a guy dealing with it, and out of everyone we hear, he seems the most down to earth. He's a fucking guy. And I like that Rowan's not only his issues. And it's a testament towards the show that they can characterize side characters so well. This also goes towards Juniper, who isn't just a gag character with a funny Finnish accent. This also goes for every character, even if I don't talk about them. Now we get into the actual issue. It turns out Juniper hasn't been helping Rowan take the fish to the penguins. Have you guys forgotten about the penguins? The penguins that live underneath the camp and demand fish every week? I sure hope you didn't forget about the penguins. And again, Juniper doesn't even attempt to defend himself. He just says that Rowan looks handsome in his red shirt. Rowan and Juniper then proceed to argue about the color wheel and addition. Rowan accuses Juniper of sidetracking conversations. And for the first time, Jedediah is given salient advice. That Juniper just needs to be straightforward, and even if the conversation can hurt him, putting it off would just make it worse and worse. Huh.
You can't get hurt by a conversation I never have.
You just keep bothering the people around you.
This is struck down by Rowan, and that people are just going to get hurt by his lack of self-awareness. People such as Rowan, who is now forced to take the fish to the penguins by himself. And when Rowan reasonably points out that Juniper is being irresponsible, Juniper points out that this is an example of Rowan being rude. And Jedediah is more genuinely annoyed than we've heard him being with anyone else during the mediation sessions. just generally pretty snippy with Juniper. Man, I wonder why Juniper in particular is annoying him. He was pissed that Juniper would shrink off a promise and be an asshole. In specific, he says,
How do I explain to you that you need to care about other people?
Might be reading too much into it again, but with Jedediah and the use of the wood care, it seems notable. He seems upset at Juniper for not caring, and in the situation, caring is extended towards keeping his word and helping Rowan. Was justified with actions. It's strange how Jedediah seems so particular with that point. Juniper says that he'd be more likely to help Rowan if he didn't feel like he hated him, but Rowan doesn't, and just doesn't like how he continues to try and wriggle his way out of fish duty. Jedediah cuts him off and says that Juniper is just trying to manipulate Rowan.
You're blaming your own bad behavior on Rowan's totally justified frustration, and you're trying to distract him from his anger by invoking his sympathy and guilt.
Yes, I know, but it's obvious. Well, I'll address it when the episode does. Rowan shows maturity and, again, good character building. By not getting angry at Juniper and just reassuring him that he doesn't hate him. And Jedediah is shocked by this. Maybe he's shocked by the concept of Rowan, that Rowan could forgive Juniper after the scummy things he did. Projection. Rowan interrupts that sweet moment to ask if Jedediah could close the blinds, and Juniper feels the need to explain this in an exasperated tone, but when addressed, he explains that he is worried about Rowan. Juniper tries to explain why he's been genuinely unhelpful by saying that he's too emotionally exhausted by his cabin, who, to be fair, try to kill him often. And Rowan describes how he's also got it bad because of his constant panic attacks over the sky, but he still delivers the fish.
Not everyone's as strong as you, alright?
Juniper, for the love of God, grow up!
Yeah, I mean, he is shifting the blame. Okay, so Jedediah, so clearly applies the situation with Sydney. The notion of caring and needing to be backed up by actions and not just words. And Juniper failing to show Rowan he cares about him at all. He also now states that intentions and thoughts also do not matter, but actions do, which is different than what his previous perspective seemed to be, because earlier with the Tonys, he seemed to justify how he treated Sydney by saying he was just protecting him and keeping him safe, and now he seems to have come to terms that he just hurt Sydney.
If you genuinely like Rowan, and you want to show him that you care about him, and you value what he wants and what he needs, you need to prove it with your actions, okay? Your actions are what matter to the people around you. Not your words, or your intentions, or your thoughts, or your fucking anything else but your actions, and your actions show Sydney loud and clear that you don't give a shit about him.
He replaces Rowan's name with Sydney in the argument. During this whole interaction, Jedediah was projecting onto Juniper and thinking of Rowan as a Sydney stand-in of sorts that needed to be defended from himself or Juniper by him. And Rowan and Juniper definitely heard that mix-up. And what I like to think happened was that Rowan and Juniper awkwardly looked at each other and wordlessly acknowledged that they are not equipped to deal with whatever the hell that was, and chose not to bring it up and move on because they don't acknowledge what just happened. Rowan and Juniper seem to make up, and Juniper seems to have learned a valuable lesson about relationships and communication. I'm also so sure they are now going on a date in those penguin tunnels.
But he's such a pal.
And really, Juniper, I like your company. You're good at conversation. And I think you'd like it down there in the tunnels. I could show you around.
Oh, I'd follow you anywhere, dear lad.
I mean, Sydney did joke that the tunnels could have been used for romance, and we do immediately see Juniper trying to show Rowan he cares through actions. Juniper seems wishy-washy about going on the Sydney search party, but when Rowan agrees, he immediately confirms he will too. Episode 21. Jedediah is on the announcements today, and he is continuing to panic about Sydney. Marisol comes in and encourages the kids to go to her if they see anything. Damn, no one trusts Lucille anymore. They're just cutting her out of the equation entirely, not even trying to get her involved in a counselor going missing. Announcements are cut off, and then we hear Sydney. Not over the announcements, but through his tape recorder. He's in the forest with his tape recorder. He's very far from the camp and doesn't know how long he's been away. Turns out, when Sydney was stuck in the woods with the trees barricading them in, someone with a very handsome voice invited him for tea. The Pink Elephant Man. Yay! Oof, this episode. He seems to have expected Sydney to come to the altar, Soren's altar in the forest, by himself, and Sydney would have if he didn't organize the group himself. I will talk about that later, because I think that's an important detail. Despite Sydney being scared of the man, he feels like he has nothing left to lose.
Option 1. The Elephant Man isn't dangerous. That's great. I'll learn everything I want to know about him. Jedediah and Lucille will be proven right, and I can let go of some of this bitterness. Then there's option 2. He hurts me. Or tries to. And, well, hey, I'll still get to find out what his deal is. People might start taking me seriously.
The only way he feels like he can be taken seriously at this point is if he gets physically hurt, because nothing else has gotten people's attention. Sydney's super lost and is getting fatigued.
One by one, we all stay alive. I'll move forward.
Good quote. Good quote, Sydney. Lunchtime announcements. Yvonne is imitating Sydney and making fun of him. Turns out Yvonne also went to medical school, so is filling in as nurse for that day. She also goes to read Sydney's announcement notes, but it's incomprehensible to her, like the words are dancing around.
Oh, thank God, Jedediah.
Hi. Juniper should be fired.
The mic's on, dude.
Just kidding, children.
Nice.
I'm assuming he just got back from the mediation session from last episode, and assumes he still does not like Juniper. She gets Jedediah to read the announcements, and he can understand Sydney is writing fine. We hear from Sydney again, back on his tape recorder and back in the forest. He's super tired and fatigued, and is just trying to find somewhere familiar at this point. He also doesn't trust Jedediah to be the lone nurse, which shows how incapable he thinks he is now. He doesn't just repeat his claim that he's bad at bedside manners, he seems to doubt that he can even treat the kids in general. And then Sydney starts talking about his past. Yippee. Sydney's mom had a filthy house, and this filth greatly exacerbated existing issues with his health. He got so sick that he became constantly scared of dying. 5 days from his 17th birthday, Sydney went to leave and told his mother, but she didn't do anything or even react. He went to Jedediah's house, and both Lucille and him welcomed Sydney with open arms. This obviously contrasts with how they currently seem to treat him as a burden, at least from Sydney's perspective. He and Jedediah never put a name on their relationship, which at least partly explains why they're awkward about labels. And I mean, there's another clear reason, but you know what I mean. Sydney also apparently had a fair amount of unhealthy intimate relationships, and Jedediah seems to have been the first person in his life he felt cared about him. So this again adds context to how Sydney sees other people and how he thinks they are unlikely to actually care about him. But if the only person who has seemed to care about Sydney no longer does, then yeah, Sydney's gonna start to spiral about that.
He only offers anything to me when it suits him, when it benefits him. And he doesn't love me more than anyone else.
He also goes to him when he wants to downplay his emotions and make sure that Sydney doesn't hate him. He again admits that he's still scared of the Elephant Man.
Yeah, the guy is a creep, but at least he wants anything to do with me.
Christ. Dinner time announcements. Jedediah just gets to the point and is clearly very upset. The only time Jedediah kind of shows he cares through actions is when Sydney is not there to know about it. And then we get back to Sydney, who's still in the forest. And Sydney tells a story. We finally got the blue jay. Woo, the blue jay. Blue jay mention. This is an animal that represents Sydney. So keep that in mind if we ever see another blue jay. Anyways, the very tired blue jay is strangled by a centipede, and then the centipede eats his heart. Centipede mention, woo! I kind of go into the centipede like a while later. Hey, didn't the man in the red suit also eat a heart? Also centipede eating representation of Sydney.
which seems somewhat connected to when in an early episode, Sin was talking about how a centipede eating a past version of himself that is malnourished, and soon he'll feel it crawling on his back. Centipede and eating, that's the connection.
I'm in hell. I'm in hell.
Episode 22. Jedi is upset and is forming a search party. Back with Sydney in the woods. Then Sydney wakes up. There he is. He's here. He's here.
Good morning, sleepyhead.
The moving elephant man. He's here.
Pink elephant guy?
You have such a way with words. And I must say, you look ravishing right now. Even so disheveled. Even awake.
Phenomenal fucking introduction, yeah, for the Elephant Man. Very good. I think it sets up the character fucking great. I like it. It's very gripping. I like to use that word a lot, apparently. Like, we knew the guy was interested in Sydney for some reason, but we never knew the extent or what emotion motivated it. But he makes it immediately clear that he's infatuated with Sydney right off the mark. And I don't know about you, but this guy that Sydney was really scared about the whole series, seeming to just really like him, took me off guard and was so unnerving. It's such a good fucking, like, surprise and introduction. Like, again, I just said, like, the whole show, like, Sydney's fucking scared of this guy who's, like, stalking him, who's showing, like, some interest in him for some reason. And then we meet him and he's just like, hi. It's so off-putting. It's so good. And now I can quickly talk about why I found that note in the first episode kind of funny. The note the Elephant Man left in Sydney's office so he would read it over the announcements. The whole note is quite unsettling, yes, as I've talked about. But the one line, he's been described as not too short and not too old. Yeah, this could just come off as a description, but just the way it's written, it always comes off to me like he's making himself look good, like just kind of hitting on Sydney in this letter. Like, I just kind of imagine the Elephant Man kicking his feet while writing this part, thinking about how Sydney might find him attractive. I don't know. Who describes himself like that if they're just trying to give a description? There's so many other details about this man that he could use to describe himself. Not too short and not too old. Like, that's such an odd thing to say, but it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's just like the way it's phrased is so making himself look good. I don't know if you get what I mean. Him and just him like giddily listening to the letter being read over the announcements, like just high in the forest, just like giggling. I don't know. Sucks. He sucks. Anyways, his introduction is disorienting, you know? Which puts you, the reader, in a similar state Sydney's in. Very confused, but kinda disarmed because he's being kinda sweet. And he, apparently, watches over Sydney's sleep and very much enjoys doing so. And remember, the Pink Elephant Man just being around Sydney makes him so very tired, so Sydney's barely coherent currently. Sydney was placed on top of a pile of campers' stolen stuffed animals, and Sydney found his stuffed rabbit on the table in front of him. And it has a kiss mark on his forehead. Fun fact, the Elephant Man apparently does not wear makeup, so it's not a lipstick mark. Also very clear heads up that the guy is not stable. He stole Sydney's loved items just so he can seemingly fawn over it in place of Sydney himself. And I guess at least for the most part, the kids weren't using the Elephant Man as an excuse to steal, because a whole lot of the stolen things seem to be there, and we never actually hear proof that the kids were ever stealing anything. He also somehow stole the tower. You guys remember the tower that disappeared? We never learned how he did that. And I honestly hope we never learn how, because I think it's funny that he somehow stole a tower. He also has Lucio's stolen grandfather clock. If Lucio cared about it, I feel like we would have heard about it more, or like somewhat but the clock, it seems to be attached to the Elephant Man in some way, and he doesn't really seem to enjoy that. He's apparently not able to see his own reflection on anything but the glass of the clock for unknown reasons, and his heartbeat seems to be synced up with the clock and the Earth's rotation. I don't think I can connect this to anything that I've currently wrote, so this might just be a nothing statement right now. I think the wording implies that the clock goes with the Earth's rotation as well, because the phrasing is that is his heart is synced up, his heartbeat is synced up to the clock. I don't know, I don't have the script or the transcript in front of me right now. I just have my script, and I think the wording is that is synced up to his heartbeat synced up to the clock and the Earth's rotation. I think that, so does the clock go with the Earth's rotation, and that his heartbeat just matches the clock? Who's connected to what? What's going on? Or is it just the clock and the Earth coincidentally? Or is one controlling the other? Who cares? Who cares about the clock right now?
It tells me things I can't know. I've been watching, Well, I'm sure you know. I know you know, in fact, but did you know that I know you know? Well, now you know. And I must say, you are even prettier up close.
Great character. Love him. At first I understand why someone may think that he's putting on a show to keep Sydney's suspicion low, but he just sounds so genuinely giddy. When I was first listening to this, I kind of assumed that he was trying to be what Sydney wanted him to be. If people really listen to the podcast, you know what I mean. I hope you understand, I mean. But kind of putting on a show of sorts to keep Sydney engaged. But he just sounds so genuinely, but as the podcast goes on and as I'm re-listening to this part, he just sounds so genuinely giddy about being able to talk to Sydney. Even if he is planning some kind of fucked up shit, he seems to genuinely like Sydney in some way. The Pink Elephant Man starts going off about how much he truly loves Sydney, saying that there's no one else he could love like how he loves Sydney. He calls him divine. He offers to tell Sydney the truth, an explanation. He's clearly telling Sydney everything he wants to hear. He calls everyone stupid for not deeply valuing Sydney, and states that he loves Sydney so much he would die for him. And Sydney is obviously very taken aback by such a strong show of affection. Just a heads up, I want you to know that this guy uses a lot of religious language that is hard to repeatedly capture in what's supposed to be a kind of recap. So just autofilm that in your mind sometimes. Thanks.
What did you mean by the truth?
Yes, the one that your bastard clockmaker keeps hidden.
Jedediah?
Do not speak his name!
Whoa.
He's disgraced your good graces and therefore has lost mine.
Ooh, whoa. Whoa. I really like. Whoa. Sorry. Whoa. It's not even shocked. It's just a whoa. It's not good. It's good voice acting, but I just whoa. So Jedediah is known as the clockmaker to the Elephant Man. We haven't really heard about Jedediah making clocks himself, but we do, except one time where we hear about him tinkering with one. But we do know he owns some fucked up clocks, such as the one that can stop time. But having the title of clockmaker implies some kind of grandeur about it. So that feels like some new information. The Elephant Man finds his skills of clockmaking so notable that he makes it into a title. He explains that his immediate distaste towards Jedediah by saying that he has hurt Sydney and so finds his name dirty. He says that Jedediah should worship Sydney. He continues by describing how the Earth worships Sydney, that the world functions around him entirely, and that just by existing he's given back.
It turns out the Elephant Man wasn't always so devoted to Sydney and tried to stay away from him at some point and avoid his calling.
I too tried to deny the calling at first. I was scared, you see, of how my world would change once I welcomed you into it. So I understand why so many of your peers reject and dismiss you. It just means that we've got to show them you and I. We've got to help them understand you.
Was something actually influence him to follow Sydney that freaked him out, or is he just being metaphorical? He also plans to spread the love of Sydney to other people.
For who could truly know you and not love what they knew?
He calls Jedediah a stupid bitch and says he's hiding information even from him. Sydney refers to Jedediah's journals, and the Elephant Man can barely contain his anger at Sydney's use of the layman's word for the sacred text. He wants Sydney to steal the sacred text, to which Sydney is obviously anxious about.
My apologies, darling. Here, why don't I help you relax?
Sydney's knocked the fuck out because the Elephant Man takes off his mask, and the exposure of his face enhances his sleepy effect on Sydney. He immediately uses this to his advantage and goes to dance with Sydney's limp body. He seems fascinated and incredibly endeared with Sydney's unique reactions to his power. He quickly drops all the information about himself. You know, I really went back and forth on whether or not to put the Elephant Man's actual name into this video to give y'all more incentive to go and watch the show yourself. But I gave him because his name is so much easier to bite than the Pink Elephant Man over and over. His name is Elijah Volkov. He's from Russia. He has a religious background and a wealthy family, and he shepherds in his free time. And he likes the taste of lamb. Wow, I love religious metaphors. He asks Sydney to describe himself, and in a haze, all Sydney can manage out is...
I am.
Which is an answer that Elijah loves and describes himself as Sydney's prophet.
I pluck halos off of angels and melt golden calves in your name, and I am going to prove to everyone that you are.
I am assuming that he's insinuating, I like this quote, but like, I'm stupid. Again, I'm very stupid. So like, I'm assuming he's insinuating that angels are not as worthy as Sydney of their station, and so will disregard that and make something to honor Sydney himself. Because as far as I understand, the building of the golden calf is in relation to the Moses story, and the building of the calf was seen as a bad thing, and seen as creating a false idol. But maybe Elijah's disregarding that point completely in favor of him agreeing that in the notion that Sydney is more worthy than anything else out there. I may be misunderstanding this bit though, I don't know. IDK. We hear what is probably Lucio's grandfather clock chime, and Sydney agrees to get the journals. And before he goes, he takes back some stolen objects. Wait, why did Elijah eat Sydney's worms in episode 1? Is Sydney not gonna ask? Lunchtime announcements. The search party is happening, and Yvonne and Joshua are doing announcements. And they proceed to have charming and funny banter. It turns out Joshua also can't read Sydney's notes either. But instead of the words being jumbled, Joshua straight up can't see anything on the page. Then Sydney comes into the cabin out of breath. His cover story is that he passed out in the woods after accidentally sniffing the wrong plant. He's also touched that Jedediah formed a search group for him. And then Sydney takes over the announcements. Dinner time announcements. Sydney apologizes for being away for so long and makes fun of Joshua for thinking he can be a nurse just because he has a medical degree. Fun fact, out of Jedediah, Sydney, Yvonne, and Joshua, I'm pretty sure Joshua is the only one to graduate medical school. Recorder segment. Sydney plans on secretly giving back some of the stolen objects he got from Elijah. Then Jedediah walks in. Sydney is clearly more short with Jedediah than he's been before. Jedediah clarifies that he cares about Sydney and that he doesn't want to lose him. This does not work with Sydney, obviously. It's still just words without anything backing it up.
Cindy even clarifies that he didn't think that he cared about what was right and wrong. Cindy makes fun of Church and Jedediah. Jedediah starts to apologize for his actions, then quickly makes a U-turn in the goodwill category. He apologizes about how his actions may have influenced Cindy's own decisions, and he's not mad at Cindy for said decisions.
I understand you're just reacting to untenable circumstances, and I mean, a lot of that is my fault. This is clearly different than how he was acting previously. Before, he was solely blaming himself for everything, and now it feels more like I'm sorry you feel that way kind of apology. He put together that Cindy was meeting with the Elephant Man. He states that the man is dangerous, and Cindy explains how Jedediah ignores him all the time and refuses to explain how he's now a danger to him.
But when I don't know, when it's an excuse to control me, it's suddenly a huge concern. I'm in danger. I should be worried. I should stay inside.
Yeah, of course Cindy would believe this. That seems to be the only common factor from his perspective. Jedediah is apparently allowed to keep secrets, but not Cindy, and Jedediah states that's not a fair assessment. He begs Jedediah. Cindy begs Jedediah to tell him why the Elephant Man is dangerous. You know, an explanation. But he's not able to.
So, you did meet with the Elephant Man?
No. He's dangerous, remember?
Okay.
I didn't grab my rabbit.
With Elijah, he was grabbing other stolen things, and he still didn't think about what he wanted. He forgot to grab something that was very dear to him.
Episode 23. There's more that almost killed Cabin Widow Spider. Jedediah is actually being a nurse today, and Cindy returned the items he took back and implies over the announcements that the Elephant Man isn't that bad. And now Lucille implemented safety measures against the Elephant Man by using her oak mannequins that contain tormented spirits. And Soren's released from cabin arrest. Lunchtime announcements. Soren broke into the announcement cabin and is now mad rambling and spitting onto the microphone. Turns out he engineered regular mold in an attempt to make it so contact with it will give eternal life. He also points out that the camp is unique, and he couldn't so easily find alchemical reagents anywhere else. And he's still ranting about the Sacred Mother and encourages the kids to welcome her and touch the mold. Then Cindy walks in with Joshua and Rowan as backup.
You brought backup?
I figured you might resist. Boys, I've always wanted to say that.
Soren is picked up by the scruff of his neck and taken outside while he continues to tell the kids to touch the mold and screams religious persecution. Sydney's back on the mic. Earlier, Cindy and Jedediah agreed that the mold should be studied. When Jedediah left the building, Soren shouting at him can be heard. He wants the mold to be left alone and says something specific about necromancy, which sets Jedediah off. The floodgates open up and Jedediah just starts yelling at Soren about how he does not understand necromancy. Soren was able to replicate the effects of the death fields, which apparently makes him possibly one of the most powerful magicians of their time. With advice from the Gravediggers, Cindy makes a serum that halts the major effects of the mold. Cindy also doesn't know who plans today's events, and it definitely isn't Lucille, so who knows what's going on there. Dinner time announcements. Cindy waxes poetic about how death is a beautiful thing, but removing death from the equation makes life meaningless. But death is still scary and Cindy is scared by the concept, as he is deeply familiar with fear due to the amounts of times he's had to face it.
No matter how hopeless I feel about whether any sort of happiness or peace may lie on the other side of the fight, I stay alive. We all stay alive. Not because we want to, but because we must. And will.
Cindy's possibly particularly wistful because of his recent emotional state. He understands the desire, but again, life without death is pointless. Also, the kid's fine, the one that was, beckoned. Soren has been sent home. It seems Lucille had reached her limit with what she feels like she can sweep under the rug.
Have a great night, campers. Everything is okay.
Recorder segment. Cindy listens back to the conversation he and Elijah had that he recorded. He specifically winds back to when Elijah is talking about how much he loves him, and then goes to the part where he talks about how Elijah's a bitch and hurt Sydney, and how Cindy deserves his love. And then we're reminded of something Jedediah said a while ago, and I don't think I put it in here, but Jedediah says Cindy is the smartest person he knows, and I do believe Cindy's smart. He immediately notices that Elijah does probably have bad intentions and is manipulating him.
Even if he isn't deliberately manipulating me, the subduing magic he has on me inherently compromises my ability to think.
Which I think is really refreshing as a character trait. He's not being tricked in the way we expect. Like, yes, of course, he is being manipulated, but like, he's at least partially willingly given into the whims of this guy for his own reasons. He's maintaining some kind of power in the dynamic in his perspective because he just might know what he's getting into. You know, at least in this relationship, he knows what to brace for. And any sense of control or care is something that he craves. Cindy goes into the contrasting emotions he feels regarding Elijah. Of course, his powers leave him totally malleable to him because of how so sleepy he gets. And this freaks him out because autonomy really matters to him. But Elijah also confirms Cindy's worries about being unseen. Are justified, which makes him feel seen. And he does make him feel appreciated. Mediation episode 24. This one's about Salem and Sydney. This episode takes place after the next one, so we get some knowledge that we don't have the context for yet. Salem thinks that Sydney mishandles his authority, such as Sydney letting a fox into the nurse's office. Sydney is just unhappy to be here. He tries to justify himself because he's dialed back all the oversharing, and is just trying to lighten the mood with what he says. When Salem argues against that, we get introduced to Sydney's okay reaction. When Cindy gets overwhelmed or feels like he's being ridiculed without a reason, he doesn't have any mental energy or want to deal with it, he just responds to the person with, okay. Salem's upset at some justifiable things. Things such as Cindy saying that he was happy the kids were brainwashed by the hive. It was really just he admired how sweet and tender the kids were being, with something that hurt them. But yeah, recommending that they leave the kids alone isn't the best advice. And how he stated that he no longer thinks that the Elephant Man is dangerous. She accuses Cindy for not caring about the kids anymore, and like, this isn't true. Salem obviously can't read his mind, so she doesn't know, but Cindy does care about the kids, but just has some like life experiences and traits that influences how he treats them. And this feels like something that Cindy would argue against, but he seems to have shut down mentally and just responds with, okay. But after some prodding, he admits that he thinks it's unfair. He says that he doesn't have any authority to influence anyone, and that no one listens to him or respects him enough to even take what he says into account. Another mention of Cindy's autonomy. Woo! Cindy doesn't have the autonomy to be blamed for bad stuff that happens at the camp, and no one even pays attention, and that Lucille should be blamed far before him. Salem says that he just needs to be more careful and notes that he even left the nurse's office vacant. Obviously this feels targeted because according to Sydney's story, which we have to assume Salem believes at this point, Sydney passed down the words, and yet she doesn't blame Jedediah, the co-nurse, for not working there that day, or really ever actually doing the job in general. But Jedediah's absence that day could be justified by him looking for Cindy and other people were covering for him that day. He also dismissed the prospect that any of the counselors care about him.
And I get it. I know. I can't stand myself either. So you don't have to like me. But don't lie about it. Don't call me intolerable to my face and then turn around and go holding it over my head how much you worry about me and care about me.
And this statement feels especially pointed towards Jedediah. That Jedediah only comes to him when he wants to be comforted about Sydney not hating him, and when he wants something from him. And again, Sydney desperately wants to be told the truth. He goes on to describe himself as a nuisance. As stated in an earlier episode, Cindy truly believes that he drives people away, and he questions if he drove away the only person he believes loved him, so the nuisance comment makes sense. Jedediah tries to reassure him.
I don't see you as a nuisance, Sydney.
Or a thing to avoid.
Sydney.
Sydney comes down and apologizes for his outburst. Jedediah tries to acknowledge it and questions if it's due to untenable circumstances, and if they need to be more appreciative towards Sydney. The phrase unattainable circumstances is something said in episode 22 when Jedediah is trying to get Sydney to admit that he's seen the pink elephant man. Sydney says that his circumstances aren't a factor and he's just upset at being accused. Maybe I'm wrong, but again some things he says do feel particularly pointed at Jedediah and built up anger he has at his circumstances. And maybe people appreciating him would make him feel less like people only put up with him. But of course, in this situation, it feels condescending for it to be brought up when he's upset. Jedediah again focuses on Sydney not feeling like he's cared about, and Sydney just nonchalantly rolls with the notion, and he just feels like it's unfair that it's leveraged against him. Like he's fully come to terms with no one caring about him. Jedediah and Salem both question why Sydney has been acting off. Jedediah thinks it's real personal with Sydney. He states how he wants to tell Sydney everything but he can't, but wants to be there for Sydney now and listen to him. Even if Sydney currently did just want to be listened to, Jedediah seems to have lost a lot of Sydney's goodwill. Even if Sydney did talk to him now, a lot of his frustration would stem from Jedediah not telling him anything, and it wouldn't really get anywhere because he has stated, at least to the audience, that he can't, for unknown reasons currently. Sydney says that Jedediah doesn't even listen to him vent. I could have read this wrong, but Sydney talks about a bit later that a while ago in college, Sydney would typically be the one who talks while Jedediah listens, so this little back and forth becomes more impactful when that is considered. Jedediah is trying to do what they used to do, and listen, but that's tainted now, and Sydney, someone who wants to recapture the past, or at least the bond that he and Jedediah had, can't even indulge in this because it isn't the same. The trust is gone right now.
You're not my therapist. You don't need to sit there and listen to me vent.
I want.
It's fine. Really.
Salem admits that she might have been out of line with some of the accusations, but still holds strong that Sydney needs to be a better example, and that people do care about him.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, you're right. I need to put others first. I promise to be more careful. I mean it.
You mean it?
I mean it.
I think Sinius is trying to get out of the situation by saying this, obviously. In other episodes, he talks about how much he feels he gives and how little he's given back. And the way he says, I need to put others first, feels reluctant. He feels like that's all he does. When Salem reassures that she doesn't hate him, Cindy responds with, okay. So he does not believe her. Salem leaves and Jedediah apologizes. Cindy asks why. Cindy says that Jedediah is fine, again. In an early episode, the only time Jedediah tries to talk to him, it's when he needs reassurances so he doesn't hate him. The "you're fine" feels like a reflex to me. He's upset with Jedediah, but just says he's fine. Then Cindy leaves the cabin.
I have to go now.
Okay.
Bye.
I miss you. I'm such a fucking idiot.
Episode 25. The episode with the aforementioned fox. A river has appeared in the middle of the camp, and there's a spelling happening, and Juniper is brought in to explain the ominous chanting from the woods. The hunt is here. The hunt is a group of men who are cursed to hunt a silver fox for all eternity. Typically it can't cross water, which is supposed to confine them to Britain, so Britain may have merged with America at some point. So the river that appeared at the camp will protect the camp from the hunt.
Isn't it all too convenient how just before we're invaded by rowdy toffs, the campgrounds suddenly acquire a moat?
Maybe the campground is special in the sense that it can have the foresight to protect the camp. We know that there's something about the camp that is special due to Soren, Payne, who sealed a work there, and other things, he says. This could also be a joke. Sydney has the fox, and he's quite fond of it. He's pissed on behalf of the fox that she's forced to participate in a curse that isn't even her own.
She's just a hapless tool, and she gets no say. She doesn't get anything at all. Everything in her life is just overwhelmed by pain and fear and never-ending struggle to avoid it.
So Sydney is like projecting on this fox. The helplessness that he sees in the fox is very much relatable to him. And the fox being used as a tool is something Sydney mentions feeling, that he just has to give more and more of himself to people. Ironically, this view of being used as a tool can be seen as being confirmed in Sydney's mind in the last episode, with him reluctantly agreeing to be more selfless. Rowan has brought the macaroni penguins to defend the camp against the hunt. Dinner time. The hunt is here. Half of the penguins are rat bastards and join the hunt. It turns out the fox actually sustains itself on the energy that the hunt produces in their fervor to kill her. And Sydney was essentially stopping the animal by trying to protect it.
I was not the good guy here. I coaxed her, manipulated her into my office. I kept her trapped there. I was intent on keeping her forever. Sure, it was for her safety. It was for her sake. But no amount of care can justify imposing my will on her like that. Because in the end, I wasn't giving her a say, which made me no better than whatever sick Brit spun this curse in the first place.
That statement that Sydney was doing it for the fox's protection, I think is supposed to be a callback to Jedediah's treatment towards Sydney. Jedediah does want to keep Sydney safe, but Sydney isn't included in the decisions Jedediah makes on his behalf. I probably don't need to describe it, but just take the quote and pretend that Jedediah is saying it about Sydney. Of course, the connection between Sydney and the fox isn't 100%, because Sydney doesn't feed off people's hatred. Quite the opposite, you know. There are points in the show that attempt to clarify Jedediah as a person along with his possible motivations in a more clear light, which makes it more clear that he does care about Sydney, and what Sydney said about the fox is Jedediah's situation with Sydney's encapsulated. Sydney gave the hunt their fox back, and off they went. Recorder segment. We are listening to a past recording, where Sydney and Jedediah were in college. Jedediah is ranting about a video game, and Sydney's listening. Again, the moments where we just hear them happy together is important, and it's nice to be reminded that Jedediah is a nerd. He catches Sydney recording him, and Sydney defends himself by saying that he just likes listening to his voice when he's not there.
It helps when I miss you.
That is freakish.
Freakish?
I feel like most people, if you did this to them, they would not be happy.
Are you most people?
Unfortunately, no.
Unfortunately?
They go to bed and Sydney makes a bad pun. The recording clicks off and we hear current Sydney.
February 2015.
He was listening back to his voice because he misses him. Episode 26. The river's gone. It's rock climbing day. Yay. And Joshua is acting weird. Rock wall number 1. Wall deep. The smooth wall grabs climber and pulls them in where there's a hollow interior with grips. The only way out is up. Rock wall number 2. Wall safe. When a climber reaches the top, they will ring the bell, and that will communicate how the ringer can prevent, quote, the early death of one of your loved ones. And each time the bell is rung, it gets taller. Wall number 3. Wall isolated. The wall goes on forever and reaches the hypothetical border of the universe and reflects upon itself. Joshua is acting erratic and speaks ominously of things to come and how he needs to do things right this time. He's running around and stopping things that haven't happened yet and is trying to, quote, save everyone. Lunchtime.
Learning the terrible truth is a rite of passage, a natural goalpost in the path through adolescence.
Joshua was trying to herd the kids away from wall safe. Jedediah was also there, mumbling to himself.
And muttering, I don't need it anymore. I don't need it anymore.
But he gives in and tries to climb it. I guess he wants to know how to prevent the death of a loved one. When Joshua tries to get him to not climb the wall, a screaming match begins between them. Then Joshua says something that causes Jedediah to walk off. Sydney invited Joshua to talk about what his problem is. Then Joshua goes on and tells Sydney everything. Completely drained and desperate, he tells Sydney that he's stuck in a time loop, where by the end of the day everyone is torn apart on a molecular level, which doesn't feel good apparently. So Joshua has been trying for dozens of redos to save everyone. This is told by Sydney putting on a shitty whiny voice, impersonating Joshua. I already kind of talked about Sydney's impressions, but this is another example that I just really like. Sydney doing an impression which is kind of making fun of Joshua, but he still acted it out with the sincere air and gravitas that Joshua had.
Sydney, I'm so tired. How many times do I have to watch you all die?
Sydney's unimpressed and criticizes him for not telling anyone and for acting like he's a protagonist.
You know, when I was a kid, a large portion of my daily diet consisted of complimentary condiment packets from the school cafeteria. I was so malnourished. I'd take all the free nutrients I could get, and when the other kids saw my ratty little self slurping soy sauce straight from the packet, they'd point and laugh. They just didn't understand.
You. We get to hear about this more later. Can't wait. I'm sure Salem is not pleased with Sydney saying this over the announcements though. Dinner time announcements. The thing Joshua told Jedediah back at Wall Safe is that he was stuck in a time loop. Jedediah questions why Joshua would be stuck in a time loop, cause fuck Joshua, and he figures it out. So what actually happened is something you have to watch the show to figure out. Sydney doesn't really care and is more notably upset with Jedediah because he got the wall, carted away without telling anyone, because no one else now can get the satisfaction of solving the mystery, and just has something taken away from them without explanation. So that indescribable pain of the day resetting is something that Joshua has experienced many a times. The reason Joshua was able to get through it wasn't because he was special, and it's because of a reason you can watch the show to fucking figure out.
A case of male hysteria, maybe? Let me try to read his lips. Something about... What was this all for? What could I possibly have learned from this? God, universe, whatever's out there, why did you put me through this? Oh, blah, 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 blah. Jeez, what a downer. Rejoice! We live to see the next calamity.
Fucking hates his ass. Reporter segment. Whoa, oh no, this one. So, Sydney is going to find the journals. Just like Elijah asked him to. Because goddamn, he wants the truth. And he knows that Jedediah is trying to hide something that involves him. When he opens Jedediah's office door, we hear various clocks ticking, and Jedediah has a chunk of wall safe. Man, that's kind of... Wait, holy shit, is that a framed photo of Jerry Lawson? Father of the video game cartridge, Jerry Lawson was an American electric engineer. He is known for his work in designing the Fairchild Channel M video game console, as well, leading the team that pioneered the commercial video game cartridge. He was thus dubbed the father of the video game cartridge. According to Black Enterprise magazine in 1982, he eventually left Fairchild and founded the game company Videosoft. Wow. You know, I was pretty critical of Jedediah this whole video, but you know what? I don't give a shit what he did no more. He's an alright guy. And behind the framed portrait of Jerry Lawson is the safe. Implies a lot that Sydney does not react to the framed photo of Jerry Lawson, and that I will start to assume that Jedediah has gone on extensive rambles about Jerry Lawson to Sydney. Anyways, the journals. Sydney puts in a date code that he seems shocked about, and it opens. Yippee! And then Jedediah enters the room. Oh. Sydney acts with the truth on what he's hiding, and Jedediah says that just no one could put him in danger. And Jedediah at least partially doesn't want Sydney around the pink elephant guy because he might tell Sydney his secrets. Sydney tells him that him keeping secrets is ruining their relationship and is very much hurting him.
I just need to understand what the hell is happening to me.
You won't be safe.
What if I'm okay with that?
I'm not.
Jedediah says he's protecting Cindy, and Cindy says he doesn't care if he gets hurt by whatever Jedediah is keeping from him. But he won't let Cindy choose that. He won't let him get hurt. But despite how much he apparently cares, he never spends time with Sydney.
If you get everything you want, here I am. No autonomy, no compassion or support, no idea why.
I can't afford to be around you.
He seems to explain that one reason he keeps Sydney away is because he fears that if he gives Sydney too much information, he'll latch onto it. He regrets Sydney even knowing that the journals exist, and justifies his worry for Sydney by using the fact that Sydney himself admitted he does not care if he gets hurt.
You're the one who doesn't care about your own safety, by your admission.
You're the reason I'm unhappy enough to say that!
Beat of silence. Sydney profusely apologizes, and Jedediah asks if he can just give him back the journals, and he does. And then Jedediah plans to hide it better, and Sydney's alone in the office with the famed photo of Jerry Lawson. Episode 27. Sydney does not seem to be in the best mood.
Gravity works harder on an empty hand.
Hey, fun fact, this is one of my favorite episodes. But, oh, it's this one. but also the one that frustrates me the most. I've nicknamed this episode the poetry episode. I don't know if that's accurate, but whatever. I've had a hard time summarizing, and for me to try and say something about it, I feel like I just need to quote the whole thing, because a lot of it is written like poetry, and you can't really just summarize that without taking out important shit, which I don't want to do. And I'm also stupid, and I definitely don't get a lot of this episode, and I've chosen to not look at any other interpretations before making the vast majority of this whole thing. If I say some stupid shit or ignore something important, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This also goes to the whole video too. I might leave out a line if I don't have anything specific to say about it.
A hand left empty quickly loses its senses of self. Have you ever woken from a deep sleep and found yourself unable to make a fist? Somewhere between your brain and your fingers, the signal is lost. Your hand isn't listening. It forgot itself.
God, I'm not good at analysis. Earlier in this episode, an apple is used as an example of an object that Sydney is reaching towards. Blah blah blah, apple is the fruit of knowledge, and Sydney wants what's considered forbidden knowledge, you know? At least from Jedediah's perspective, so he desperately wants to make contact with it. The apple also has connections with the man in Sydney's dreams, someone who was offered Sydney an apple, and even ate one himself, along with Sydney. Does he know something important? Man, I wish I knew. Maybe him waking up could be related back to the dream man. I mean, like the line, "It forgot itself," is a callback to when Sydney was talking about why he likes animals from his other dream. Like they never forgot to be scared, and he's not vigilant in that moment and forgot himself.
I can't make a fist. My fingers won't curl in far enough. I'm out of luck if I need to punch something. I don't know if I'm just weak, or if my hands have been left empty for too long.
Sydney was talking about how reaching to touch an apple earlier, so maybe his hand is empty from lack of apple knowledge. And the lack of apple is making him weak knowledge. Yet he continues to reach out. He's also talking about how he keeps trying to get things he thinks he can't have, such as a relationship or the truth from Jedediah.
My brain sends the signals, screams, then screams, grab it, but my hand isn't listening. It's forgotten how.
Maybe this means he's gotten so used to trying to appease people that his body isn't getting the signal that Sydney just wants to know something for selfish reasons. Sydney hasn't grabbed anything for himself in so long that he forgot how.
Grabbing, reaching, Stretching, pointing, moving, ticking. 2 hands per person, 2 hands per clock. Now there's a pair of hands that are never empty. They carry knowledge.
The clocks are on point. They represent some form of knowledge, or they literally do hold knowledge that Sydney wants to know. I mean, Lucio's grandfather clock tells Jedediah things, and Jedediah is labeled as the clockmaker, who himself holds the knowledge that Sydney wants to know. Localized tornado, and Sydney keeps his head down. The tornado is Sydney's hectic life. He just keeps his head down and just goes with it. God, this is incomprehensible. Me doing this, not the episode. Then the wind stops.
I hate the quiet. I hate the calm. At least when you're spinning, you know whether you're gonna be spinning, i.e., you will because you are. The quiet leaves you no such assurances.
Sydney doesn't like pain without reason, as said in an earlier episode. It gives him reassurance that his pain has a point. But when he's just left in the dark, he's filled with uncertainty.
There's a swelling tension in the still.
Oh my god, Hawaii Part 2 reference.
Electrons begging to orbit, hands begging to make contact, to wrap around me, to rip me apart, to tick, to tuck, to measure the passage of time by the droplets of water that fall out the faulty faucet.
This one's hard. Said hands that are ripping Sydney apart seem to be that of a clock. The clock's hands, I think, are established to hold knowledge. Yet throughout this section, Sydney's act of reaching out is related to getting knowledge / trying to reach out to people. But when a clock reaches out, it's to hurt Sydney. It is probably talking about how Sydney's need for knowledge itself is ripping him apart, or the clock is directly related to Jedediah, the holder of knowledge, and that his reaching out towards him is ripping him apart.
There's a clock on the table in Jedediah's office. It's hewn of pale green quartz, lightning struck with veins of gray and hugged on each side by petrified wings. There's a jagged, circular sort of crest at the top, and the clock faces like a window to the sky. I imagine it's spinning now.
The sky is spinning in the face of a clock.
The sky is spinning. Do you see it too? Swirling clouds and technicolors, a whirlpool of stars. The air rushes through me, churns my blood. My desk falls from the ceiling, smashing the light fixture on the floor. Try not to think about it. Keep your heads down. Spin, blink, spin.
So Sydney's seeing a similar storm as the one he seems to have used to describe his situation in the clock probably isn't the best sign of what's to come, especially considering it's Jedediah's clock. Apparently in this universe, all clocks need to be made out of quartz, and nothing else works.
But from what I recall of Jedediah's theory, it's something to do with quartz's flexible attitude. Clockmakers sure have the work cut out for them, huh? I'm sure that's why Jedediah wishes he was one so badly. Anyways, this pale green clock with the clouds floating across its face. Jedediah once called it the clock of meantime. I wonder what it says right now.
And apparently Jedediah really wanted or wants to be a clockmaker. Sydney is an oracle and it's established that he can sense what time it is. So him being curious about what the clock says probably means it measures something other than time, or something that he would know otherwise. And then the announcements click off. Lunchtime announcements. Sydney details the time Jedediah told him how we got the clock of meantime. Jedediah mostly just listens to Sydney rant about things such as gardening or arts and crafts, but he seems to want to tell Sydney about how we got the clock.
It was back when I thought I'd never see you again. I'm floating through my existence. No anchor. My hands empty, my fingers limp.
At some point, Jedediah was without Sydney for a while, and was scared that he'd lose him. Did Sydney get really sick at one point? Jedediah is aimless. Sydney also says earlier that a hand left empty loses its sense of self. and Jedediah is lost. And then we hear a train. Jedediah says he got the clock in a wheat field. A big guy in a trench coat is standing next to him.
And the smoke from his pipe, but you can tell he's strong by looking at his hands and his eyes. Fist-forming hands. Railroad uprooting eyes. I don't know who he is, but he acts like an old friend.
The man comments on the sun despite the lack of one. The sky looks like it was shattered. Jedediah makes the correlation between the shattered sky and that of a shattered clock. He seems to like using clocks as comparison. Maybe if the clocks hold knowledge, then the shattering of the face of one could be seen as unleashing withheld knowledge. That being compared to the sky shattering could mean that there's a threat of something being unleashed.
I try to remember how long I've been sitting here in the shadow of the fractured moon, but all I can think about is the railroad.
On Jedediah's clock, Sydney says that there is a broken crest on top. It seems like the crest is supposed to represent the moon.
Cuts through the crops, weaving and winding in and out of sheaves of wheat. The same day train has been rushing by for hours now, ringing and rattling in the fuzzy night. I try to count the train cars. I lose track.
Right now, as I'm writing this, I'm really uncertain about that damn train. So the man is described as having railroad uprooting eyes, which could just mean that they're intense, but combined with the importance that's put on the literal train tracks, maybe the man is able to interrupt what the train represents, or is a part of it. And the train is something that Jedediah can't keep track of, and something that he's trying to.
Strongman won't stop looking at me with his railroad uprooting eyes. Uprooting me. I want to fight, but I can't make a fist. My hands have been limp for too long. Look at the sky. Don't look at him.
Fist mentioned again. Earlier I said that Jedediah having an empty/limp hand is in relation to Jedediah being without Sydney, or losing his sense of self. He's also very intimidated by the man. He feels the need to appease him.
Strongman blows smoke out his teeth. You like pork? He asks. No, I don't. I can never eat pork again. I feel sick. I nod at him. He's making me dinner later. I look at the sky. The stars look like train tracks. I try to count the stars. There are only 2 that matter.
We do actually learn why Jedediah does not like pork later, but for now just know it has something to do with Sydney, and know that he's disgusted by the prospect. This is an oddly specific question for someone who Jedediah doesn't seem to recognize, so I think this man knows about what happened surrounding his dislike of pork. He has access to some intimate knowledge about Jedediah. What the fuck are the train tracks? What are the 2 stars? The 2 stars, what are the 2 stars? That one bothered me a lot, I don't know.
Strongman got me a gift. Saw this and thought of you. It's a green clock. Atop it, a cardinal dances, singing and tapping at the clock face with its beak. The hands wind together as they spin. I think of train tracks. The cardinal sings louder. I remember why I'm here. And I want to cry.
Cardinal mention, woo! And according to some Google searches, cardinals can represent a lost loved one watching over. There are some other things, but this one feels the most applicable. So Jedediah is thinking of the train tracks in correlation to the cardinal singing and the clocks. Is it the train death? Is the train just death? Is the man death? Track of brooding eyes, and he seems to be comfortable here? That seems wrong. What are the 2 stars? What are the 2 stars? Jedediah remembering seems to be triggered by the cardinal combined with the train. And again, I'm pretty sure that the symbolism for the cardinal they are going with is the death of a loved one. So the birds singing, making Jedediah cry, would imply some things about some people. And the train being death could fit, but it feels off. But the cardinal itself seems to imply like at least some form of death. So he came here somehow on purpose and was given the clock. It seems like Jedediah is fucking with things beyond his means.
Strongman laughs out smoke. So formal. Well, I'll see you later. Don't lose track of this then. He taps the clock's side and stands back up. The cardinal sings louder. I stick my fingers in my ears. It's ringing. I can't make out what it says. Strongman looks at me. I look at the sky. A horn sounds. The sky finally shatters and I slip through the cracks.
You'll see Jedediah later. The clock is trying to tell him something, and if I was accurate with saying that the sky shattering could be knowledge being unleashed, then Jedediah falling through it could show that he's being lost in the search for something. But a really cool and genuinely well-constructed train noise blares.
Next thing I knew, Jedediah tells me, I was alone in an empty room, cradling the clock to my chest. I remembered the strong man, and I remembered my father. I reached for my phone, and my fingers curled around it.
So either the strong man resembles his father in some way, or he just wants to talk to his dad, or he just wanted to talk to his father after that kind of thing happened. And then the announcements cut off. Dinner time announcements. Sydney continues with the story.
It counts down the time remaining until the next big event.
Jedediah told me. There's little to parse from that. The next event relative to whom?
I never know. It could be me. It could be you. It could be I don't know. I feel like I could if I just focused. I used to be so good at reading clocks. But it's always counting down, Sydney.
The clock that he got is a timer that tells when the next big thing will happen. And the way he phrases it seems to imply that the event is never good.
I remember when I got back home, Sydney. I remember my father's strong hands folded across his stomach. I wanted to think he was sleeping, but he was so cold. His skin felt just like... There were more stars in the sky than I remembered, and my mouth tasted like copper rails.
So he's dead. The stars are back. When his father died, there were more stars. Are the stars dead people? Why would there be two to start off with if they were dead people? We don't know who else they could be. Why would only two matter earlier then? Who are they? I don't think that's it. Is he tasting blood? I guess if the trains were meant to be death, then it would make sense for him to taste metal rails here when he's confronted with his dead father.
I'd given him sips of my story like pokeweed juice. I knew it. I knew it. And that goddamn clock was ringing! Maybe if I'd have been able to read it, but I can't. I still can't read it. I hear the way it whispers to me. It's taunting me, Sydney.
Apparently just telling his father this information killed him. And his father's death was an event that the clock was counting down towards.
I sit next to him for hours, frozen, just like with... There were more bushes in the front yard than I remembered. I heard sounds coming from the abandoned train track, and I hear the clocks whisper. Everything was wrong. I got it wrong. I should have known, but I didn't. I don't know it. I could. I have to.
Whoa. Just like what, Jedediah? What does spending an extended amount of time with a corpse remind you of? I don't really know what the Weizenbush population has to do with anything or what that could mean. Is it metaphorical or literal? If it's literal, Are like galaxies collapsing atop each other? What? If it's metaphorical, what the fuck do bushes have to do with anything? This could also apply to the stars, but the stars were already established to have some importance. I don't know. If the train is death, then again, it would make sense for it to be incorporated here.
His skin turned grayish. I swallowed the acid I'd coughed up and relished how it burnt my throat. I'd never spit this up again. I'd let it dissolve me before I let another heart stop. Sydney, listen to me. I love you. I'll dissolve, okay? I'll shatter like glass. Like the face of a clock. And it whispers, Sydney, so please don't listen. I love you.
Jedediah not wanting anyone else to die seems very pointed at Sydney.
I couldn't handle the body. I can't handle the body. I walk away from the body, and most nights I don't think about it. But sometimes there's a rumbling under my desk, cold and distant like metal wheels through the mountain, spinning like the hands on the clocks that... If I could just know, 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 if I could...
I had something written here for a while, but it fits better in another section, so I'm just gonna move it. So just stick this part in your mind. And I don't know if it was intentional, but when Jedediah is repeating the phrase, to me, it starts to sound like a train. You know, like chugga chugga chugga. You know, like chugga 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 chugga. Like if I spaced out really hard and was like half listening to it, it would kind of sound like that. Or is it just because it's rhythmic, and I just correlated it with trains because they're talking about trains? But I like it. I like that line. Record a segment. Woo, whoosh.
There you are, darling. Kept me waiting. Behind the trees now, behind the trees. Wouldn't want anyone seeing us now.
Nobody's gonna see us, Elijah. It's like 3 a.m.
You never...
Hi, Elijah. So, Sydney goes to see Elijah late at night. The amount of pen names this man can conjure is absurd. He asks Sydney if he has the journals, and Sydney breaks down about how upset Jedediah talking to him like that made him. And Elijah comforts him.
The way he talked is haunting.
Oh, sweetheart. Oh, pumpkin, don't fret so. All is never lost. Not for you. Not for one so loved by the world. By me. If you stumble, there will always be a tree to lean against. If you fall, the soft soil of the earth will catch you. You are always fine.
Another connection between Jedediah and Elijah with things that they say. In an earlier episode, when Sydney was trying to convince Jedediah that he should care about the Elephant Man, Jedediah says that Sydney's fixation on the Elephant Man is odd because nothing in this camp ever hurts him, that he's always fine. And Elijah using the same phrase, but he recontextualizes it into a genuine form of comfort. It's really interesting. This will be brought up again when I talk about Elijah and Jedediah connections.
Don't worry about what that man thinks. A foolish clockmaker who can't comprehend his own words doesn't deserve your friend.
Earlier, Sydney said that Jedediah wants to be a clockmaker, and yet Elijah acts like he is currently one, and does not like it. Elijah questions that if Sydney is an oracle, why can't he just figure out where Jedediah put the journals?
But it's incidental, passive data about the world around me. I can't just get any answer I want, and I definitely can't use it to ferret out information that's hidden from me.
But you're you. You can figure it out, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks, Elijah. That's really helpful advice. I'm sure you can do it. We get another explanation of Sydney's oracle abilities. Sydney says he has faith in Sydney, so he should have faith in himself. He then giggles and skips off into the woods. I like tiny moments where Elijah is just being kind of fucking weird. Just because he does come off as scary and a threat. So it's kind of, I don't know, humanizing to see him just be a fucking freak. This episode has really good sound design. The trains, the clock, the wind chimes. It's really good. I'm not good at talking about that kind of stuff. Sorry. In my opinion, this is the only episode that kind of creeped me out. There's creepy moments in this show, but it's more unnerving with the relationship dynamics and the looming threat of the Elephant Man. And that does stick with me, obviously, but I don't know. This one actually gave me horror vibes. The acting and sound design in this episode is part of the reason as to why. And also the mysterious implications of some of the stuff in this episode is fucked. It's very immersive, I don't know. Now this season is self-admitted to not be that scary despite it being a horror comedy. Which, yeah, it's not scary for the most part. But one excuse I want to make for it is, for me, the subtle horror fits with the kind of looming mystery. You don't fully understand what's happening and you're lost and sometimes unnerved. The style of horror fits with the story to me. And hey, the next season is supposed to be more scary, so that's exciting. Okay, we're finally done with this episode.